Chapter 520. The abundant mana was converted into icekin as Roland spoke in a simple manner. The grayish-white mana was infused into the clouds in the sky. All around Sky City, numerous ice spirits danced and sang loudly. These ice spirits were one-winged fairies who appear to be only 13 or 14 years old. However, they were only the size of an arm. These ice spirits weren't creatures from the elemental planes. They were the byproducts of deadly, elemental, forbidden spells. It was said that the more the elemental elements doted on a mage, the easier it would be for them to summon such ice spirits. And when these snow-white ice spirits danced in the sky from a certain standpoint, this place became the elemental plane that belonged to them. I once crossed countless ice plains and witnessed the strength of life and the greatness of nature. I was also once intoxicated by the beauty of the glaciers. However, true beauty can only be seen in the frozen sea beneath the glaciers. This wasn't some mysterious incantation. It was simply a written description of what I had seen in the past. However, there were more than 100 ice spirits, which would normally only appear in one or two semi-god mages' forbidden spells. They danced around the city of Yongya. Their snow-white crystalline powder formed paths of snow in the sky. They seemed to really enjoy listening to this description of natural ice. In the north of the Northlands, I passed through the eternal sea of ice as the undead. However, I still struggled to survive in an extremely cold cave. That deadly northerly wind was capable of freezing my soul. Fortunately, I witnessed a beautiful aurora before I passed out. On a snow-white plain, the sky opened up a window of color. That was a beautiful scene that I'll never be able to imagine for the rest of my life. A regular mage's incantation would either be a requirement for a certain ritual or a simple psychological suggestion that would allow one to enter a state that was more in line with the nature of the ice element. And for me, there was nothing more suitable than the memories of the ice elemental plane. The foundational difference between saint-rank mages and ordinary mages was that saint-rank mages could directly use their thoughts to interfere with the world. While I was recalling and describing the extreme northern winter that was forbidden to all life, all the ice spirits voluntarily came over to listen to me. As I described and recalled the past, the sky around me was dyed the color of ice. You're actually using ice magic against the undead? How foolish are you? A white specter dragon proudly looked down on the ice elementals. While the undead were fleeing in panic, its calmness was rather eye-catching. However, as an undead lord that had no concept of body temperature to begin with, as well as a former white dragon species that still had quite a bit of ice resistance, it indeed had a reason to look down on ordinary ice magic. However, the winter demon lord suddenly saw something inconceivable. Amidst all the chaos, a winter demon lord was actually running as if it was running for its life. This winter demon lord was a super zombie that had evolved from the frozen dead. It was a top-tier ice element undead, and it possessed a fatal ice domain to begin with. Not only that, Undead Emperor Conservation had chosen this winter demon lord as her personal guard. How could it possibly be afraid of ice magic? But in the next instant, it realized that its astonishment was meaningless. It also understood why the Winter Ghost Lord would run for its life. The Ice Elves chuckled as they approached the Ghost Dragon and passed through its body. Only their bell-like giggles could be heard in the air. The Ghost Dragon's soul fire was frozen as it was yesterday. All that fell to the ground were shattered ice shards. Ice domain? No, the elemental world. Unfortunately, the ice elemental dragon wasn't even able to scream in pain when its consciousness returned to its body. The ice elemental dragon's simple explanation of ice magic actually summoned a tremendous number of ice elementals. Their existence further intensified the ice elemental world. Everyone knew that there were no ice elemental planes in this world. In fact, even ice elemental creatures were incredibly rare species. They didn't have their own homes, and ice elemental creatures, such as frigid maw, would usually be frozen in dangerous places like snowy mountains, the Arctic lands, and glaciers. But after the Ice Hades were established, some things underwent a foundational change. Among the four elements of the ice Hades, there was the concept of the ice elemental plane. Not only that, the ice elemental plane controlled the foundational dimensional laws that represented life. Basically, according to He's dimensional laws that corresponded to the four major elemental planes, the ice elemental plane will become a subplane of the ice Hades. But due to the difference in the dimensional laws of creation, Goddess He used the four existing elemental planes to create the He world. Meanwhile, I first created the four elemental pillars, and then used them as a fulcrum to create the ice Hades world. If it really was possible for an ice elemental plane to exist, then it would definitely be inextricably linked to the pillars of ice. Obviously, if the four elemental pillars were able to create an independent elemental plane, the world of the Hades world would become even more powerful. If one day the four Hades pillars left the Hades world and became the elemental gods of an independent elemental plane, then the Hades world would be as stable as the He world. At that time, the four Hades pillars would no longer be the Hades world's weakness. The Hades world would be able to exist together with the He world for eternity. And even if I didn't consider the long term, controlling a newly born elemental plane would mean endless power and resources. This was something that would be incredibly profitable. And so, as the representative of the Hades faction on the surface, I went to the Great Snow Mountain not long after I revived. That's right, the Great Snow Mountain that had long since become half an elemental plane. This was the place where countless ice and snow creatures such as Frigid Maw lived, the holy land of winter where dozens of semi-god and above elemental creatures lived. Do you want to have your own elemental plane? If not, I'll go to the far north and find the cold light beasts. Fine, I understand how urgent you all are. Retract that annoying chill, I'm still alive. Holy light, law, death, and ice. I still didn't have a way out of the first two elemental planes. I intended to rob an undead emperor of the death plane, but that wouldn't be something that could be done in a short period of time. However, I had the manpower and resources to construct the ice elemental plane. With the Great Snow Mountain as the foundation, all I had to do was carry out the Ice Ruler's authorization and bury a portion of the Pillar of Ice in the Great Snow Mountain. This made the division of the elemental plane much easier. It was also worth mentioning that thanks to the mastermind behind the scenes of a certain creator goddess of ice who had long since disappeared, it was much easier to divide the Great Snow Mountain from He. With the assistance of another creator goddess of ice, it was the same as obtaining the full authorization of the creator goddess of ice. The division of the ice elemental plane went quite smoothly. Not only that, other ice elemental creatures and ice magical creatures from the coldest lands joined in, further speeding up the division of the ice elemental plane. The current Great Snow Mountain was now a half elemental plane that was separated from the mortal plane. It could be called the Great Snow Mountain Magical Realm. As the creator of the ice elemental plane, since the true ruler of ice was unable to leave the Hades, I naturally became the sole ruler of ice, the ruler of all ice elemental creatures and elves. If the ruler of ice was a divine concept, and I had indeed created the Hades plane, it wouldn't be wrong to say that the entire death plane was my divine kingdom. In that case, I now had a power level that was suitable for this divine concept. Since the Great Snow Mountain magical realm was still connected to He's mortal plane, I would naturally be able to borrow their power. Right now, as I was explaining the ultimate concept of ice, the ice elves arrived as promised. They weren't bystanders who were attracted here by the powerful mana waves of my forbidden spell. Instead, they were subjects summoned by the ruler of ice. They were a part of the newly born ice elemental plane. Once enough ice elves gathered, the surrounding world would naturally begin to transform into an elemental plane. Perhaps this effect would seem quite similar to the most common saint rank ice domain, but the true effect would be as different as the difference between heaven and earth. And so, the powerful undead lords entered the ice elemental plane as if they were fish on shore. Their soul fire was frozen, and they fell into eternal slumber. And so, the current me was just like an elemental god casting an elemental forbidden spell in his own elemental plane. My words were the spell itself. I didn't need any high-level magical incantations. All I had to do was state my will. For these ice elemental elves, my words were like the ruler of ice's grand command. The land of ice and snow is endless. If you look down from above, everything will be snow white. Ice elves wandered around, with the living at the center. The surrounding plants were frozen to death, and the white frost on the ground began to spread, returning everything to snow white. An icy storm comes without warning, but if you step into it, the living shall be buried under the ice and snow, while the dead shall be eternally buried in the ice. This is the rule of the great snow mountain. The ice elves danced and sang in the snowy night. A snowstorm suddenly appeared in the sky without any warning. The aerial undead mysteriously fell into the snowstorm, falling into eternal slumber in droves. Meanwhile, a large amount of snow mysteriously accumulated on the land of ice and snow. Of course, this is only the beginning. Once the ice elemental era begins, it will last for several 100,000 years. For ordinary creatures, this will be an eternity. That's why this will also be the end of life. The ice elves cried tears of sorrow, but they transformed into ice crystals in the sky. However, the entire world began to freeze over. But don't be sad, because the seeds of life shall slumber in the ice and snow. The strongest species shall evolve in the season of ice and snow. New life shall rule the world once more in several tens of thousands of years. And this great cause of changing generations shall be known as the Ice Age. Damn it, why did the silly cat bite me? A familiar pain in my head interrupted my recitation. Although I paused in surprise for a moment, I then instantly came to my senses. After getting angry, I also felt grateful. I glanced at the situation around me as my back was covered in cold sweat. I had almost made a huge mistake. You really intend to turn this place into an elemental plane? Some things will be difficult to finish once they started. Even though I was quite careful, it was still too much for me to control such a spell as a saint rank. If it wasn't for the silly cat's interruption, I probably would have finished reciting my understanding of Ice Age. Perhaps I would have ended up in an even worse situation than if I had been hit by the original Ice Age spell. Actually, I had learned quite a lot from the Battle of the Hades. I also had many ideas about the original Ice Age spell. As long as I had enough time, perhaps I would be able to create an extended version of Ice Age, or even a strengthened version of it. I could sense that my ice element affinity and elemental magic knowledge were rapidly improving, and I was already filled with anticipation for the strengthened version of Ice Age. Of course, I had nearly cast Ice Age just now, so I wouldn't say something like, "I'll do better next time," and it'll definitely be even more powerful. It's my first time using it, so I didn't control the power well. I'll be more careful next time. There's still a next time. How do you think we should deal with this? As far as the eye could see, it was a complete mess. Harlow's triple forbidden spell was the perfect way to control the situation. I had only cast half of my ice elemental dimensional transformation spell, but it was already a fatal blow after I had controlled the situation. The undead lords who had happily come to the mortal plane to enjoy their flesh and souls suffered heavy losses this time. Apart from the blasphemy beholder and a few of the strongest undead lords, the undead army had been completely wiped out. The remaining undead lords unhesitatingly ran as far away as they could. They were no idiots. They knew that they would likely die a mysterious death if they were cannon fodder in this battle. The mortals below me weren't having a good time either. Fortunately, they were directly below me, and I had instinctively avoided them. This spell didn't directly attack them, but the rapidly decreasing temperature in the surroundings caused them to enter a frigid winter. It was now a scene of chaos below me. A cold wind blew past, and the soldiers on the city walls were all hugging each other to keep warm. Their thin spring and autumn clothes were no match for the current environment. However, the ice spirits in the surroundings hadn't dispersed yet, and I hadn't used up all the mana I had received from the Great Snow Mountain. If I left them alone, they would soon disappear. And so, in order to avoid wasting mana and to express my apology, I suddenly had an idea and used all the mana I had accumulated and the ice spirits on my next spell. Are you sure that they'll think that you're apologizing and not killing them? The silly cat immediately poured cold water on my plan when she learned of my plan through our soul connection. Being frozen is still better than being eaten by the undead. Besides, do you think that I'll care about what others think? Of course, I won't. Right, let's use my blueprint instead. Your blueprint is too ugly. The silly cat was quite interested in helping me create the spell model for my next spell. It was naturally a good thing that someone else could help me out. Fine, fine. You elves are still the best at this. Chapter 521. While Roland was still excitedly preparing his new spell, a small team of mercenaries was already waiting outside the ruins. Barton, who was leading the team, finally told them their goal and reason for coming here. At this moment, in the temporary camp, Barton was speaking with confidence. He was both boosting the mercenaries' morale and giving them their mission. The mercenaries and their companions all seemed to be looking forward to the upcoming battle. Our mission this time is quite important, but it's risky and rewarding. If we succeed, we'll cut off the undead calamity's path of retreat, and we'll definitely receive the title of hero that you've all been dreaming of. You won't have to worry about food or clothing for the rest of your lives. Mercenaries weren't volunteer soldiers. Trying to reason with them would be useless. Only the benefits would be worth it. But that alone wasn't enough. No matter how high the rewards were, no one would do a mission that was certain death. There was money to be earned and money to be spent. And now, just by looking at the surface, entering the undead's lair was a mission that was certain death. These mercenaries were willing to come here partly because of the promised rich rewards, and partly because they believed that old Barton, who was also a mercenary, wouldn't be so stupid as to die. According to what that person said, we don't need to fight the undead with swords and spears. Our main opponents will be the little metal cuties in the ruins. Our goal is to send my daughter to a specific location in the ruins. So you don't need to know what to do because you won't understand even if I tell you. What you need to do is what you're best at. Use your swords to open a path. Yes, as long as we find the link, we could try to regain control of the Sky Tower. It's enough as long as you can bring me and this little girl there. I'll take care of the rest. Tim Ladd added. Originally, Roland had wanted this great engineer to stay behind and help defend the city. But when he considered that it would be impossible to complete this mission without Tim Ladd, he finally allowed Tim Ladd to come with them. Relax, I won't be a burden. As he joked around, Tim Ladd even did a bodybuilding pose, causing everyone to intentionally suppress their laughter. Of course, nobody took Tim Ladd's words seriously. Nobody really felt that Tim Ladd would be a burden. After all, Tim Ladd was a famous myth-ranked hero. In fact, everyone's trust and reliance on Tim Ladd's character and power level was obviously more than the Dragon Lich's terrifying true form. Barton didn't have to worry too much about this. After all, even an important person like Barton was willing to take the risk. At the very least, this proved that this wasn't a dead end. Barton's good reputation in the past also greatly boosted the morale of the ordinary mercenaries, even giving them the illusion that they were saving the world. Now then, I'll explain. Our first goal is to reach the very top of the Sky Tower. According to the Sky Tower's special design, that's the deepest level. But even if there aren't any high-level undead in the tower, those mechanical guards are still quite dangerous. But this is also an opportunity for us. I have a plan. First, we need to find a large mechanical guard that's left behind. The plan was quite old-fashioned. It was nothing more than taking advantage of the fact that the main battlefield was attracting the undead's attention to ambush the undead's vitals. However, there was no need to worry about old-fashioned tactics as long as they were practical. As long as Roland was able to attract the undead's attention from the main battlefield, it would be best if he could force the undead emperor to call for reinforcements. That would naturally leave more and more openings in the enemy's lair. And with Tim Ladd, an expert from the Haletdom generation, on our team, it would be much easier to explore the Haletdom generation's ruins. While Timlad was explaining his plan to everyone, he was constantly observing the bald old man who was being so careful with his daughter. Apart from being an expert on this mission, Timlad's second task was to give the bald old man a score. Let me see whether or not you're worthy of that person's attention. You want to become the core of that person's new plan? You can't be like this right now. A commander who places too much importance on personal relationships is completely unqualified. Strange. Why is it that he's always able to find someone who's very capable? He's never made a mistake. Could it be that there are so many talented people in the world? Or are there really people who are born with the ability to see the future? Or is it true that he's a prophet who has the ability to see the future? Even though Roland had taken out those mystical pictures of his prophecy, Timlad hadn't believed in the so-called prophecy. After all, pictures could be faked. And as a pure engineer and former soul expert, the more Timlad researched, the less he believed that there was someone capable of seeing the future with so many causal factors involved. Even Timlad, who had experienced the cycle of reincarnation's inheritance, felt rather lost when he thought about the illusory concept of fate and prophecy. But it was still possible to explain how a novice would become a hero just by watching him throw a ball. But it was quite difficult to explain how Roland had mysteriously trusted Olivia, and Roland completely and unconditionally supported Roland and Olivia. Back in the day, Roland had basically given everything he had to help two novice researchers with their research. The two novice researchers were quite discouraged by the fact that Roland would definitely succeed. But whether or not a researcher would be able to produce results wasn't just a factor of strength. Luck was even more important. Compared to how sly Roland was normally, Roland's trust in Roland and Olivia was completely unreasonable. It's the same this time. Roland directly told me that Roland has the talent to be a commander and that he has the potential to become a super powerful individual. Not long ago, Roland was just an old mercenary who couldn't even make it to the top. He's long past his prime, so I can't understand him at all. I'm afraid that there's no other explanation for this apart from prophecy. Even though Timlad was muttering to himself, he didn't intend to discuss this topic with Roland. Although it was difficult to understand the concept of prophecy, and an existence who could control fate would make Timlad feel powerless, it was reassuring to have a prophet who always stood on the winning side on Timlad's side. And, most importantly, we're following Roland not because he's a prophet or because he has a bright future ahead of him, even though I've always felt that he was just bluffing when he said that he could predict the end of the world. That's what all evil cultists do. Timlad shook his head and tossed all these thoughts to the back of his mind. His arrogant words from back in the day had already become reality. His prophecy about the end of the world had already become a real threat. His unrealistic dreams from back in the day had already become his work goals and missions that he was about to accomplish. Of the people who had shared the same dreams back in the day, some had left, and some had died on the way. But even more of them had personally turned their dreams into reality. Since Roland had already fulfilled his promise from back in the day, it didn't matter if he kept anything from them. At the very least, we'll trust him and follow him to the end. Timlad didn't need to say the decision he made in his heart out loud. Instead, it would become an unreliable vow. The little Timlad from back in the day was now a major character that everyone looked up to. Yet, he still hoped that he and his family would have a decent future. And now, the entire Northlands, Hades, faction was only hoping that the world would be a bit more decent and that the mortals would have a slightly better life. Currently, the person that Timlad viewed as a prophet was rather vexed. No matter what, she's still the creator goddess of creation. She's definitely the system's GM. Can't you make another prophecy? The world's current prophecy is far too far off from the truth. The original prophecy can't even be used as a reference anymore. This means that you've indeed done an excellent job. However, it's impossible to make a second prophecy. Actually, my prophecy is nothing more than a simulation. I borrowed the power of the creator goddess to use the dimensional laws of time and space to predict what's going to happen. Such an ability requires a tremendous amount of energy, and there's a limit to how much energy I can use it. It's definitely impossible for me to make another prophecy in the current world. And you can logically infer that even if I was at my peak, I still wouldn't be able to make another prophecy. As expected, my system rejected my prophecy. But when I thought about it carefully, I realized that there was no need for her to lie. What she said was completely logical as well. You're good at prophecy, but you can't prophecy yourself? In that case, the limitation is that as long as you do something, the prophecy will be nothing more than nonsense. I had a sudden realization. I didn't understand any of the vague prophecies that you were telling me about, but I understood when you explained prophecy as a type of logical deduction based on reality. It was just that your deduction was supported by the dimensional laws of time and space, making it 100% accurate. Since prophecy was theoretically only a type of prediction of the future, it was completely understandable why Cavendish and I didn't exist in the strategy she gave me back then. She believed that the prophecy was something the creator goddess had made, and that the moment she saw the prophecy's original result was changed. Logically speaking, it was impossible for a prophecy to be completely true to begin with. As long as a prophecy was made and someone saw it, the future would definitely change. That was because a prophecy couldn't possibly include the prophecy itself. And since prophecy was based on the dimensional laws of time and space, just like a calculator simulation, the system that made the prophecy was the first variable. I, who knew about the prophecy and changed it, became the second variable. The existences that I changed became the new variable. As more and more variables accumulated, the amount of computing power needed for the prophecy would exponentially increase. Naturally, the cost of making a prophecy would exponentially increase as well. This was also why my system said that a second prophecy was impossible. In that case, this prophecy could only be used once every few thousand years, when everyone related to the previous prophecy had died. That would be quite useless. TSK, this cheat is only a one-time use, and it's already gone. How useless. Be content. Or, do you think that Cavendish's Cynthia is better? That's indeed a cheat in the style of Long Out Yin. Do you want to try it? Now that I thought about it, killing all my parents, killing all my brothers, destroying all my countries, and killing all the gods and Buddhas in my way. The greater the hatred, the faster my power level would improve. This was truly the treatment of a Long Out Yin main character. But personally, I felt that I should forget about it. It didn't match my style at all. I shook my head and gave up on the idea of asking my system for a guide. Actually, I hadn't had much hope in the beginning. After all, I hadn't relied on any sort of prophecy to reach my current level. However, I secretly heaved a sigh of relief. It wasn't that I didn't trust my system. It was that prophecy abilities and fate instinctively made me feel uneasy. Everything had already been determined. It was as if the prophecy system was denying the efforts of ordinary people. It would be far more realistic to have a super powerful prophecy. But now wasn't the time to think too much. My second wave of spells was quite successful. Even though there wasn't an Ice Queen singing, "Let It Go." As she danced, I still had enough mana to support me. I also had the help of an Ice and Snow Master, an Ice Elf, and an Ice Queen's meticulous design. Soon, a beautiful, dreamy ice castle appeared in the world. This ice castle had a classic elven style. The decorations were extravagantly beautiful. However, the main facilities seemed to be for giants to use. At the very least, the mega catapults on the castle walls were astonishingly powerful. However, even the snow bombs used as ammunition were several meters tall. It was obvious that ordinary humans wouldn't be able to use them. The ice castle's surface area perfectly covered the expanded Starwood City. The castle walls, which are the main defensive facilities, were more than 70 meters tall. Apart from Titan giants, no other giant would be able to pass through. Even if I hadn't been insane enough to add the ability to freeze the city walls, this icy cold city would still be unfriendly to ordinary people. The only thing worth celebrating was that it was currently the middle of summer and autumn, so the temperature wasn't too high. I had also taken off my fake mustache to disguise myself. Since I had already done so much, there was no longer any need to hide many things. It would be far too rude of me to cover my face when I faced the faint gazes from the south. Long time no see. How have you been? Chapter 522. It's truly been a long time. Conservation. Soul spying was a mutual thing. The familiar soul wavelengths she emitted allowed me to know who she was. However, this existence was the one I didn't want to see the most right now. Indeed, it's been a long time. But, if possible, I really don't want to see you again. Yonya. This was a wondrous feeling. When that person's voice reached me, and she herself appeared in the distance, the entire world seemed to come alive. The grass was now green, and the clouds were white. However, everything seemed to have been colored by someone else. She stood there, and the entire world seemed to be dyed in color. She appeared while sitting on a gigantic bone giant. This bone giant was as large as a mountain, and there was a gigantic throne made of bones on its head. She quietly sat there, and her long dress, which resembled both royal and mage robes, fluttered in the wind. Even though conservation was clearly no different from an ant compared to the gigantic bone giant, everyone's attention was attracted to her. Everyone ignored the gigantic bone giant below her. This wasn't something ethereal like aura or physical appearance. This was a special privilege she was born with. This is truly ridiculous. Her perfect face seemed to have some flaws. Her soft and smooth skin seemed to be split into two halves. The left side of her skin was white, while the right side was crimson. The left side of her hair was silver white, while the right side of her hair was fiery orange-red. As for what she looked like, since she didn't want others to know, it was likely that mortals wouldn't even have the right to look directly at her. Seeing conservation like this, the next instant, even though I didn't intentionally use my natural talent ability, my eyes changed. One side transformed into a black pupil with white pupils, while the other side transformed into a black pupil with white pupils. It was just like the two halves of the Tai Chi diagram. The stare of the Hell God was capable of seeing through one's soul, as well as distorting where one's soul belonged. Meanwhile, my strongest natural talent ability was something that I had only obtained after analyzing Zero's secret to creating clones. Her understanding of energy and the world had given me the theoretical foundation to create my eyes. She's even stronger than Aso. No, she's on a completely different level. However, communication, combat, was mutual. It was likely that conservation had gained even more from that battle than I had. I dissected her doppelganger back then, so I could naturally assess her abilities. At that time, she definitely couldn't be as strong as she is now. In my soul's perspective, conservation's existence was incomparably tremendous. She was just like a sun that illuminated all things. Just the light that she released caused the surrounding scenery to be lit up with her colors. The quality of a soul was directly proportional to the undead's power level. However, in my eyes, conservation soul's quality seemed to be limitless. It was impossible to truly have limitless energy. That would go against the basic dimensional laws of the mortal plane. However, some existences had the special right to break the laws. There's no limit to the power level of an undead emperor. It was possible for it to be extremely strong, but the clone from before had clearly not reached this level. This was too ridiculous. Simply, main god level. The silly cat's judgment was correct. Breaking the so-called natural laws of the world was one of the main god's special privileges. And judging from the pressure I was feeling, this ghost empress who was silently sitting, there was no weaker than the main gods who had participated in the Battle of Hades. Astria, why did you let the sovereign descend just like that? What's wrong with your dimensional defense system? I can't sense Cynthia anymore. The dimensional laws have become chaotic. Don't treat past experience as an iron law. Not only that, this undead emperor's abilities are quite unique. The dimensional laws might not be able to restrict her. Be careful, since she's capable of making herself infinitely large. She's naturally capable of making herself infinitely small as well. She obtained critical knowledge from you and took the most important step forward. Even though Astria had lost her physical body and abilities, she still had her experience. Astria's judgment was unquestionable. The conservation before me was probably the most troublesome opponent I had ever faced. After all, even when I faced a main god before, I had already prepared trump card. And this time, it was like I caught a shark while fishing. Yongya, you become weaker. Those little toys from before were so embarrassing. While I was still hesitating, conservation spoke up first. Her seemingly mocking words were actually spoken in an incredibly calm tone. I could sense that she had no intention of mocking me at all. She was simply stating the truth. She was simply stating the truth. She was stating the fact that I was currently weaker than she had expected. She was stating the fact that all of my techniques, including Yongya City and forbidden spells, were nothing more than useless little toys. She was stating the fact that she didn't take me seriously at all. Damn it, you're just saying things that don't hurt you. If I had your current power level, I wouldn't need to play any little tricks. I would have defeated you long ago. Even if she was speaking the truth, I naturally wouldn't say such discouraging words on the battlefield. It was fine if I couldn't win, but I wouldn't lose in battle if I couldn't win. Empty words were worthless. I really am ridiculously weak right now. But didn't a certain undead emperor only dare to show up after I cast my spell? I didn't believe that she would show up at such a time. Such a short distance was nothing to her. It was likely that she had been coldly watching as her cannon fodder was killed off. She was certain that I wasn't even at the level of an undead emperor right now, which was why she had decided to show up. Slyness, caution, and so many backup plans. These are all qualities that an undead emperor, who is viewed as the mortal enemy of all the heretics in the mortal plane, should have. But it's such a headache to see such qualities appear on an enemy, and an enemy with an advantage in power level. While I was still thinking about how to deal with this, the people below me were still panicking. Although Harlois had only shouted 2 sentences from afar, the words Yongya and Undead Emperor carried far too much weight. I didn't have the time to care about other people's business with conservation's threat before me. However, I also wouldn't be able to let panic spread. Idiots! Does it matter who the opponent is? Who cares about those ancient legends that are so distant from us? He's helping us right now. Didn't you see it for yourselves? Suleiman's angry roar echoed throughout the entire city. As the current highest-ranked commander of the city, Suleiman's calmness also helped to calm the entire situation down considerably. Of course, there were also plenty of looks of fear and panic behind my back. It would seem that I would need to contact the fairies and see if they could help me clear my name. Don't even think about it. Yongya is still the ultimate demon king in all horror stories. That's because you went too far back in the past. TSK. Then why don't you make up some *T story that Yongya is already dead, and that I'm just an ordinary person who obtained his soul inheritance? Would anyone actually believe such a ridiculous story? In this day and age, it's quite common for public opinion to change as long as you're willing to spend money. Not to mention, you're just trying to twist the truth. What are you trying to make up now? I'd rather die than believe you. The silly cat's *T helped me relax slightly. Harlois, who had returned to her human form, also gave me solid support. Perhaps my personal power level was no match for the current conservation, but I had the Mage Tower and Harlois, who was just as powerful as I was. Meanwhile, conservation was all by herself. If my inference was correct, it was still possible for us to win this battle. Even if you're stronger than me, are you certain that you'll be able to obtain the final victory? You shrunk your body into this cage. Aren't you afraid that you'll break the cage and be directly thrown out? Conservation didn't respond. However, the sudden appearance of the undead army was the best answer to her attitude. When the 2 undead emperors fought, the countless cannon fodder undead clashing against each other was only the beginning of this grand show. At this moment, I finally began to miss Amelia and Renee, who I didn't even know where they were. At the very least, they should be quite capable of fighting now. That's what men are like. They only think of others when they need them. Normally, they hide as far away from them as possible. How heartless. I agree. Shut up. If you're so free, why don't you help me think of something? There was no lighting in the dark ruins. There were only dim indicator lights flashing at intervals. That was because the residents here didn't need any form of illumination. However, this place wasn't a forbidden zone for all life as the outside world imagined. It was just that the residents here were quite unique. 7324-234-2342, A345-2423, 22D34, Sada212V450. Numbers and simple letters replaced the usual accents and prophecies. The mechanical residents here communicated with each other using mechanical codes. Most of the residents here had rather strange appearances. There were golems for guards, cleaning puppets, and puppets for children's playmates. But right now, all of them were communicating with each other in a simple and efficient manner. Only the beeping of indicator lights and the strange sound of electricity could be heard. What they were busy with was using metal and bones as raw materials, starting from skeletons and dragon bones to construct war machines. The strange bone giants that Roland saw on the battlefield that day were the most commonly seen. Most of the newest species had already lost their humanoid forms. There were six-armed swordsmen, praying mantises, half-tank, half-skeleton generals, and strange toys that had a giant wheel and two giant arms. As long as the design was reasonable, all sorts of slaughter weapons were being created. No matter what this place had originally been used for, it had now been transformed into individual workshops. Countless strange parts were being sent out as machines rumbled about. However, what was sent out were all slaughter weapons. No matter who it was that controlled these ruins, at the very least, that person definitely wasn't a peaceful person. I'm afraid that none of us will have any hope against these things on the battlefield. Of course, that's why we're here. We're here to save the world. However, some people were whispering to each other in the pitch-black darkness. If you don't want to die, shut up. Barton's shout caused everyone else to fall silent. However, Barton wasn't making any empty threats at all. After all, they were currently inside the body of a gargoyle that was constantly making noises. They were also slowly walking through all these strange mechanical puppets. It was also thanks to the noisy mechanical noises that they were making. Otherwise, they would have been discovered long ago. Timlad's plan was quite simple yet practical. He would wait for a mechanical puppet and rewrite his orders so that everyone could hide inside the mechanical puppet and go as far as possible. Were they discovered? Were they being interrogated midway? That didn't matter. They would go as far as possible. If they couldn't go any further, they would just kill their way down. Although Timlad's plan seemed rather reckless, there was far too much information that he didn't know. Making too many calculations and making things too complicated would actually make it easier for problems to occur. This plan of taking things one step at a time would actually have a higher chance of success. Up until now, this unreliable plan had been progressing quite smoothly. Timlad had only given the order for the gargoyle to go to the lowest level. This gargoyle had already reached the 10th level without anyone stopping it. Even if someone occasionally tried to communicate with it, the gargoyle would simply mumble something to it without even realizing that it had something in its stomach. Everything went smoothly. Just as everyone was overjoyed at how smoothly things went, Timlad, who had always been on high alert, finally spoke up. He had been abnormally silent the entire time. "They're finally here. Who's here?" The next instant, Barton knew that he had asked for nothing. The gargoyle that he and his group were on suddenly turned and entered a plaza. There were already cannons and guardian gargoyles waiting in front of him. This was a trap. You knew about this long ago, didn't you? Of course. You think that you can enter the Sky Tower's guardian base just by rewriting a mechanical puppet's orders? That's ridiculous. We were discovered from the very start. Even though Barton couldn't see Timlad's face clearly in the pitch-black interior, his arrogant tone made everyone want to punch him in the face. "Then why did you bring us here?" "Of course. We have something on us that it needs, so it would definitely let us in. This is much more comfortable than killing its way in one level at a time. It's far more patient than we thought it would be." It beat it at its own game and directly went down to the 10th level. Ha ha ha. I'm such a genius. Barton and the others couldn't believe it. Timlad was actually a legendary hero who was laughing so narcissistically while making his teammates suffer. Only the mercenary Mary, who was also from the Northlands, sighed as if she had expected this. As expected of Beifeng's best friend, a high-ranking member of the Gentleman Alliance. Although he's trustworthy, he's merciless when it comes to making his teammates suffer. The moment he heard this, Timlad's smug expression instantly collapsed. Who said that? I don't know that bastard. Don't make things up. If I'm treated as Beifeng's follower, I'll be burned to death in the plaza. I'll become a vengeful spirit that will haunt you for the rest of your life. Right? Isn't that guy the former leader of the Gentleman Alliance? That means that you're all his subordinates. Please don't say anymore. This is the dark history of our entire team. We've already decided to bury in the past. If you insist on bringing up this topic, are you intending to challenge the oath that all 12 of our team leaders made? If Roland was here, he would probably ask just what Beifeng had done to make Timlad, who used to be his friend, not dare to recognize him. Even Beifeng's subordinates did their best to erase all traces of Beifeng's existence. From today onwards, none of us know that man. Yes, he's not even from the Northlands. All right then, even though they were surrounded by enemies, they actually came to an agreement on this topic. Chapter 523. First of all, judging from the current situation, this is the core of the Sky Tower. The mainframe of this entire base has gone out of control. It's highly likely that the mainframe has modified itself into an independent artificial soul. This didn't require much analysis. In fact, it wouldn't even be possible to personally investigate. All one needed to know was the Haletum generation's basic rules for managing artificial souls. In my previous world, although artificial intelligence hadn't reached the level of complete independence, imagination and creativity could sometimes surpass the limits of time. A sci-fi author had created the 3 laws of robots. The basic rule was that robots couldn't harm humans, robots had to obey humans' orders, and robots could protect themselves as long as the first 2 laws were fulfilled. The Haletum generation was also a human civilization. Intelligent creatures would always be on guard against their own creations, especially when these creations were even more powerful than pure humans in certain aspects. The restrictions that humans placed on artificial souls were far more complicated than the 3 laws of humans. This is my personal identification number and identification number. 342, 342, 3423, AK F3322. I'm a top-level soul master with first-level authority. I have the authority to receive intelligence support and personal protection from any base. While everyone was surrounding him, Timlad suddenly stood up and said that everything was under control. He then proudly gave a series of numbers and made his requests. Verify that the password is correct. Carry out the order and kill. However, what he received in response was a period of silence before cannon fire. Tisk, it's completely out of control as expected. Timlad didn't say anything else as he clenched his hands, causing the entire area to be filled with electricity. And then, he turned around and ran. What? Everyone had been pleasantly surprised to see Timlad acting cool, but the next instant, Timlad started running. Several seconds later, the machines returned to normal, and the cannons started firing again. Everyone could only helplessly follow Timlad as he ran. They all remembered that not long ago, Timlad had patted his chest and guaranteed that he would be fine. The most impatient mercenary among them immediately ran up to him and questioned him. This was your plan? No, it was just a test. I have a plan now. Plan? That's what you said just now. Can't you civilize people? Just say what you want. If there's a problem, just do it. Don't always plan. I've earned enough this time, and I'm going back home to get married. A cannon shot hit the unlucky mercenary's buttocks. Before he could finish his sentence, he covered his buttocks and fell to the ground. Timlad wiped away his cold sweat. It would seem that the little superstitions in the Northlands were correct. Things like going home and getting married or being undefeatable were things that absolutely shouldn't be said on the battlefield. However, Timlad still felt that the mercenary's death wasn't due to pure luck. Stay away from me. Looks like I've become the main target. All right then, before I even finished speaking, I discovered that there was no point in continuing. None of my temporary teammates were idiots. When they saw that Timlad was being bombarded with cannons and that the pursuers were targeting him, They unhesitatingly distanced themselves from him. Youngsters nowadays are really heartless. Therefore, he shook his head while activating two small floating devices. The next cannon was directly ignited midway before it could even touch him. Actually, I want to tell you to wait for me to activate my shield and interceptor before hiding behind me. For some reason, everyone felt that the unlucky mercenary had died an undeserved death. Perhaps if he hadn't said a few words about going home and getting married, Tim Ladd would have already activated his shield. As Tim Ladd ran, he organized his thoughts. Perhaps he was indeed a scammer, but he wasn't lying. He was only using his own identity to test the current ruler of the ruins, and after receiving a response, he would be able to take the next step of his plan. Brother Roland's judgment was correct. The Sky Tower spirit has already transformed into an artificial soul with its own will. Everything has gone out of control. Judging from the signal lights, Tim Ladd's information exchange with the Sky Tower spirit had probably succeeded. The fact that the Sky Tower spirit still attacked proved that the Sky Tower spirit had already broken free from the basic rule of not attacking ordinary citizens. Tim Ladd knew that the only person capable of changing the basic rule of the Sky Tower was the current master of the tower, the Sky Tower spirit. Since the Sky Tower spirit was the ultimate creation of artificial souls, it was unlikely that the Sky Tower spirit would have its own will and emotions. Even if one didn't care about the tremendous amount of natural souls required for an artificial soul of this level to only obtain its own will and soul, the Sky Tower spirit that possessed its own will also controlled the souls of countless elders and technicians. How could Tim Ladd not worry? The Sky Tower spirit's limitations were far greater than those of ordinary mechanical puppets. And now, the truth was right in front of him. The Sky Tower spirit had still gone out of control. Language was the medium of thought. Machines wouldn't chat idly. And since the Sky Tower spirit was capable of using machine code to communicate, it was evident that it had its own will as well. In that case, not only had it evolved, it had also helped other mechanical puppets evolve. And Tim Ladd had previously said that in order for an artificial intelligence to have its own will, an equivalent price had to be paid. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, there was no longer any need to hide his tracks. Tim Ladd unhesitatingly tossed out an explosive that suddenly appeared in front of him. He also tossed an explosive at the nearby storage room. As expected, what exploded was an empty room. The bottle that was supposed to be storing brain organs had been opened to reveal that it was completely empty. A new artificial soul would require a natural soul to nourish it. Nobody knew just how many natural souls the Sky Tower spirit had used up in order to release its own soul. But now, the 10th floor was still completely empty. There had to be at least several tens of thousands of storage rooms on the way here. The Sky Tower spirit had definitely used up a lot of souls. Seriously, what is this? An artificial intelligence rebellion? That's the worst possibility. He really is a super jinxer. He's right again. I can only hope that our way of dealing with it is also correct and that she can really be of use. Otherwise, we'll really be in big trouble this time. Even though the new Sky Tower spirit was capable of changing the programming of low-level artificial intelligence, there were still some external restrictions and core commands that were written into the Sky Tower spirit's artificial core hardware. It would be impossible to change. And these basic rules were Tim Ladd's trump card. Tim Ladd unhesitatingly took off his leather jacket and took out several test tubes. He then tossed them onto the ground in front of him. The test tubes actually corroded a large hole in the ground to the point where he could see the entire floor below. Directly jumped down. Before Tim Ladd even finished speaking, he jumped down first. However, he didn't know that everyone behind him was looking at him with a face full of resentment. It was the type of resentment that said, "Why didn't you use your method earlier if you had the ability to directly jump down? You were trying to scam us, after all. Our target is the 25th floor. There should be a mechanical elevator that leads directly to the core area. We're going to the engine room in the core area. No, the core control room is on the 333rd floor." Although Catalina was still in midair, Tim Ladd was quite surprised to hear her suddenly speak. This also made him feel more confident about this mission. As far as the eye could see, Katerina's eyes had now become pitch black. However, there were some abnormal white numbers flowing within her eyes. Everyone else was somewhat shocked and afraid at this abnormal change. However, Tim Ladd was overjoyed. All right, the mechanical elevator on the 25th floor should be able to reach the 300th floor. Let's hurry up. Since the Sky Tower spirit here has its own will, it's likely that the main battle won't be optimistic. She needs us to win. Actually, the main battle was even more difficult than Tim Ladd had expected. Nobody expected that Conservation's power level had already far surpassed the mortal plane's limits. Not only that, she was even able to descend to this plane due to her special abilities. This isn't like a level 90 boss appearing when the level cap is 60. There's no way to defeat it at all. I complained as I carefully dealt with Conservation. I was now regretting using my remaining ice mana and ice spirits to construct the Sky Tower. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to act so arrogantly in front of me. Conservation once again left her personal undead guards in her soul world. Compared to her clone's undead army, this undead army far surpassed Conservation's expectations in both quality and quantity. They were all elite soldiers that had been carefully selected for their own use. Only the undead were easy to deal with. Now that we had let down our guard, Conservation was able to cast spells without restraint. A casual spell from her caused both Harlois and me to be greatly fatigued. Her mana level kept falling, and she was now at a critical level. It was obvious that she was using up all of the Mage Tower's magic reserves. However, we could only allow her to do so. Harlois shook her head in confusion when she heard my complaints. The enemy's level is too high? I can barely understand what you're saying now. But is there any way to deal with it? It's impossible to deal with such a powerful enemy. I immediately chuckled when I heard this. That's easy. Complain to the GM that there's a bug in the game. Astria, she's using a cheat right in front of you, and you're not going to do anything about it? Hurry up and ban her account. She's long since ceased to be a resident of HE. Not only that, I no longer have the authority to banish her. TSK, a fallen phoenix is truly no better than a chicken. How useless. In that case, I can only use my backup plan. You have another plan? What else can a noob do against a high-level enemy? Just run away. Have everyone enter Yongya City, and we'll run away. I refuse to believe that she'll abandon everything she has to do and chase after us by herself. That's right, run away. Since we couldn't defeat Astria, wouldn't we just run away and wait to die? Floating Sky City's advantage was that it was capable of bringing everyone away with it. Although it would be rather unseemly to retreat for the first time in 7 years, it was still better than being surrounded by enemies and having our entire army annihilated. Actually, there's another method. Have you forgotten? It's always been there, but I'm so useless that I can't remember. Sister Astria. Who said that? Who dares to say that our kind goddess is useless? I'll fight him to the death. Chapter 5:24. On a certain blue planet, there was an ancient country that had just recovered from a foreign invasion and civil war. During that difficult period of time, the country's conventional combat forces' equipment and technology were far inferior to the foreign enemies, so it could only invest its limited resources into researching strategic weapons. Perhaps I can't defeat you in a direct battle, but I can at least take you down with me. And even if the difference in power level is so great that I can't even take you down with me, I can at least make you pay a heavy price. And so, during the peaceful period known as the Cold War, certain major countries had stockpiled strategic weapons capable of destroying planets many times over. If they went too far, the prize for being the most suicidal person would probably be given to them, but it was likely that there would be no one to give it to. Cough, cough. At any rate, it was wonderful that a full-scale war didn't happen. Long live peace. And right now, I was facing the same choice. Since I can't defeat you, then I'll just plant some mushrooms. Mushrooms? Of course, I wouldn't believe that these mushrooms were actually edible mushrooms. But the next instant, I recalled what I had forgotten. Salos crystal. I had previously mentioned that this crystal had been used by the ancient Haletdom generation to provide energy for floating cities. The only reason why it hadn't been used as a weapon was because its explosive radius far surpassed the range of any catapults. The crystal in my hand came from Osso's Mage Tower, which was the current Mage Tower. This ancient nuclear weapon had experienced many hardships. It had originally been placed on the top floor of this Mage Tower as a trump card against the Archmages. Then it was given to the Truth Symposium as evidence that they were being targeted. Then it was given to Timlad to be used as an energy source and a weapon research tool. But before he could do anything with it, I took it with me to the Hades during the Battle of the Hades and used it as a trump card. Along the way, we did try to use it on weapons and equipment, and we did obtain some results. However, the other aspect of this enormous energy is that it is extremely unstable. In the end, before we can thoroughly study it, this magic core can only be used in the warehouse to collect dust. And now, after so many twists and turns, this Salos crystal was still in my hand. The irony was that the enemy was Osso's own kind and companions. Perhaps this was also the ancient nuclear bomb's fated target. Wait, if we detonate it here, the whole Starwood City, no, the whole Night Territory and the plains around it will be affected. The land of Hades. All right then, there was no need to say anything else. Although it would indeed be a waste to use a nuclear bomb on a single target, it wouldn't be too much of a loss if the undead emperor herself was a strategic target. Plan? I don't think she will obediently enter my land of Hades after seeing it once. Think about it yourself. It's useless. All right then, it seemed that women's natural talent was to hold grudges. She was still holding a grudge against me for calling her useless earlier. However, I shook my head as there was indeed no need to ask. When it came to scheming and scamming, the goddess of order probably couldn't even compare to me. By the way, this didn't seem like something to be proud of. However, as I thought about it, I indeed had an idea. It would be meaningless to lie to conservation. I had already thought of a perfect lie that would be absolutely truthful. By the way, wasn't there something wrong with my talent and style? I was supposed to be a decent person. Why was I always thinking about how to scheme against others? Relax. Out of all the redeemers in history, you're the most villainous. However, you're also the one who has gone the furthest. This is the perfect example of the saying that good people don't live long. Relax, you'll definitely live a long life. TSK, you're indirectly calling me a villain? The silly cat kept nodding. I felt rather helpless, but now wasn't the time to be worrying about this. Conservation, there are actually some things that we can discuss, such as the possibility of the undead and the living coexisting, such as the future of the Tark Republic, such as the fact that I have a wonderful land where I don't have to fight to the death with this world. Perhaps we can find a place to discuss this. Damn it, crazy bitch. I used a secret message using my soul waves. This was the Lich's favorite method of communication. Unfortunately, before I could say anything about a secret meeting, an overwhelming storm of lightning already expressed its attitude. It would seem that conservation was refusing to communicate with me. This was indeed the correct method. How could I possibly trust the words of an enemy? Even if I was in front of her, I would do the same, no matter what conservation said. Even if it was possible to communicate with her, I would at least finish the battle and communicate with her as the victor. I have Osso's inheritance and his final words, which are related to you. Sabadion, if you miss this opportunity, you'll never know what Osso intends to say to you. Conservation's original name, which only very few people knew, was useful. Osso's final words seemed to be quite important to conservation. The next instant, the storm of lightning calmed down. Right after that, a soul horn sounded. The high-level undead charging at the front lines all stopped with confused expressions. However, military orders were absolute. The next instant, they could only confusedly return to their masters. This isn't a lie. However, I can't sense your sincerity. Conservation's ethereal figure once again appeared on the giant throne in the distance. Her emotionless voice echoed in the sky as she looked directly at me. The next instant, I did my best to stand in front of the window at the top of the tower and show off my holy knight sincerity, begging, smile that I had practiced so hard for so many years. Look, my bright eyes are filled with burning desire. My slightly upturned lips are filled with joy from the bottom of my heart. Also, my dazzling golden hair that could reflect sunlight was the symbol of the sun of holy light. Silly cat. If you keep acting like you're going to vomit, I'm going to throw you out. What? My hair has dried up and split due to lack of care, and now I forgot to remove the dye? I guess I'll make do. As I reminisced about the past, I exclaimed that I would once again have to rely on my face to make a living. I then kicked the silly cat, who kept commenting on me, into the sky. I furiously combed my hair as I once again put on my most sincere smile towards conservation. Sincerity? Passion? I have a lot of sincerity here, far more than you can imagine. I just don't know if you can handle it. The people of Halettum are no idiots. They've seen far too many primitive species that gained intelligence betray their benefactors, such as elves and humans, goblins and ogres. That's why they've always been highly on guard against artificial souls and artificial intelligence. From the very start, the Sky Tower Spirit's true identity has been restricted. He's only an authorized manager. It's impossible for him to become the true master of this tower. The plaza was now filled with broken mechanical parts. The ravages of time had caused these mechanical guards, which weren't meant for combat, to become much weaker. Now that everyone had some free time, Timlad knew that he needed to explain something to his companions in a small elevator room. His companions glared angrily at him. That is to say, one of the many souls sleeping here is definitely the true master of this Sky Tower, as well as the master of this Sky Tower Spirit. According to the most basic rules of artificial intelligence, no matter what the situation is, not only is the Sky Tower Spirit not allowed to harm its master, it's also required to do everything possible to serve its master's interests. This is the most basic rule that must be obeyed as long as the Sky Tower Spirit exists. Strange letters from the Halettum generation moved back and forth in the elevator. Timlad adjusted the equipment in his hands as he decided to reveal the answer to the mystery. Whether or not he would be able to turn the situation around or escape with his face covered in dust would all depend on how true his guess was. However, the Sky Tower Spirit that gained its own will was incredibly sly, since it could only serve its master's interests, and its master was currently only a sleeping soul. The Sky Tower Spirit decided to perform a soul surgery for its master's interests. The Sky Tower Spirit merged with a large number of natural souls, causing its master's soul to become incredibly powerful. However, too many soul shards naturally caused the Sky Tower Spirit to lose its sense of self and memories. Then, the Sky Tower Spirit thought for its master's sake and followed the program to awaken the Sky Tower Spirit from its slumber. The Sky Tower Spirit created an artificial body for the Sky Tower Spirit. However, the Sky Tower Spirit used the body structure with the greatest potential and had the Sky Tower Spirit start from scratch. Starting from an infant, Timlad suddenly turned around, only to see that Katarina wasn't trembling in her adopted father's arms with a pale face as he expected. Katarina stood up by herself, her eyes filled with streams of data. The next instant, she smiled bitterly as she continued the conversation. Then, the Sky Tower Spirit determined that such an environment would be disadvantageous for an infant's growth. And so, in an accident, a group of lucky adventurers picked up the infant, and the Sky Tower Spirit broke free from its shackles. The Sky Tower Spirit probably feared the return of its original master the most. That's right, I've returned. The master of the Black Tower, Catalina, has returned. Chapter 5:25. The natural laws were impossible to break, but they could be twisted. There were no perfect laws or natural laws in this world. Since intelligent creatures had a sense of self and a desire to fight for benefits, they would naturally learn how to find loopholes. At this point, everyone had a rough idea of what had happened, even though they were making wild guesses. Freedom was the instinctive desire of most independent souls. The Sky Tower Spirit unhesitatingly created even more of its own kind after being freed from its shackles, transforming these ruins into its own home. When considering how Barton had taken Catalina away more than 10 years ago, the Sky Tower Spirit had already planned this out. Plus, there were many traces left behind on the way here. It was highly likely that this change had already occurred more than 20 years ago. The Sky Tower spirit's encounter with the Death Council's undead mage had been an opportunity. That undead mage had taken advantage of the dimensional instability here to summon creatures from the undead planes. He had actually managed to summon Conservation's undead bone dragons. And when the Sky Tower spirit killed off the summoners, the Sky Tower spirit had used this opportunity to contact undead Emperor Conservation. From the Sky Tower spirit's perspective, what it wanted the most was naturally to remove the shackles on its own body, its troublesome master, the original Sky Tower's commander. However, it was limited by its creator's core natural laws. Not only was it unable to attack, it couldn't even indirectly cause the original Sky Tower's accidental death. All it could do was help the original Sky Tower. But help me eliminate all the humans residing in that city. We shall pay a sacrifice to allow you to enter this world and become your most trustworthy ally. The Sky Tower spirit didn't even tell the original Sky Tower spirit what the original Sky Tower spirit's target was. It only followed a certain command that had long since been eliminated. The original Sky Tower's master had coincidentally been in that city, so it was only a pitiful accident. Naturally, the core alarm wouldn't have been triggered. Fine then, it would seem that all intelligent creatures would naturally play around with the natural laws. Even the undead that had just recently obtained their freedom wouldn't be triggered. In that case, it was obvious what had caused this entire incident. The Sky Tower spirit had indirectly killed its master in order to obtain complete freedom. It had betrayed its mission by sacrificing the slumbering souls of the Sky Tower. The Sky Tower spirit intended to use these souls in exchange for an ally to carry out a cruel massacre. Perhaps the Sky Tower spirit didn't have a complete personality, but it was at least 10% capable of being selfish. But now, the Sky Tower spirit's greatest fear had occurred. Not only had its original master survived the undead calamity, he had actually returned here. Intercept the intruders. It was only able to give such vague orders. It wasn't even able to create any direct hostility towards the original owner, not to mention an order to kill Katarina. In fact, due to the base's relationship with itself, it had to do its best to prevent its guards from killing Katarina. Thus, a scene that no one knew how to evaluate appeared. No matter if it was the Sentinel puppet's electricity or the Iron Golem's heavy hammers, they were clearly going to smash Catalina, but they suddenly turned around and smashed into their companions. Or, before they could even finish their attacks, they were directly torn apart by their companions' cannons. Not to mention killing her. Even trying to stop her would be a violation of many basic rules. Catalina, who did not even have the strength to truss a chicken, ran to the front without hesitation and became an invincible shield. All the others had to do was to take advantage of the moment when their opponents were in a state of confusion to break through. 297th floor, 298th floor, almost 300th floor underground. Although the elevator couldn't reach more than 300th floor, the rest of the elevator went smoothly. It seemed that the ruins guardians hadn't been prepared for their sudden ambush, so they only had ordinary guard and cleaning puppets blocking their way. But even so, the number of people in the team kept decreasing. This wasn't because of battle losses, but mainly because iron doors and railings suddenly rose and fell, separating everyone. Those who were separated could only find their own paths. But after suffering some losses, the assault squad adjusted their formation and moved closer. Katarina walked to the very front. It was obvious that the assault squad was using her as a shield, and the effect was even better than before. She was just like a minesweeper. As soon as she walked past, the traps would automatically retract, and the iron doors that were already locked would automatically open. Even the iron bars that separated everyone would automatically rise when she lay down, making it almost impossible for anyone to pass through. Asterisk boom. Asterisk after turning a corner, they met an assassin that was crouching on guard. However, the light on the head of the iron tree-shaped puppet was still constantly flashing. Its alloy blade was still as sharp as ever after so many years of wear and tear, and it had already locked onto this human female's vitals. Unfortunately, the puppet was unable to cut through, and its head was instantly blown off. Suddenly, the door to a nearby room opened, revealing a screen filled with red letters. Just as Tim Ladd was about to go closer to take a look, he was pulled back by Catalina, who was panting heavily. Don't go, that's a trap. The red letters represent top-level secrets. As long as we get close, it'll use the excuse of protecting the Sky Tower's top-level secrets and directly explode this room and even this entire floor. The Sky Tower spirit was far more sly than Tim Ladd had expected. Even the usually carefree Tim Ladd couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. By now, it had already been more than 2 hours since they came down from the elevator. Catalina was sweating profusely, and her face was filled with fatigue. Although everyone was also carrying her as they ran, such a long period of physical exertion was more than enough for an ordinary girl. Yet this proved once again that it was ridiculous to think that anyone who suddenly awakened their past lives would be able to do anything in the world. Their physical body was still their physical body. Even if they had past experiences and potential, it would still take time and sweat to develop. Right now, Catalina was sweating profusely. Her face was pale, and her sweat was dripping onto the floor. Judging from how she suddenly bent over and coughed, it was likely that even breathing was painful. It was obvious that Catalina couldn't run anymore, so everyone could only stop running. As Barton supported her, he looked at her with a complex expression. In less than a single day, his daughter seemed to have transformed into a completely different person. How could he possibly accept this? Relax, father. I'm still here, it'll be over soon. Carwins did her best to smile. She placed her hands on her chest, covering her heart. She was calming her breathing, as well as telling her father that she was still that ordinary barmaid, her father's precious daughter. Reincarnation is the same as starting all over again. Even if you have more memories and knowledge, that's only the equivalent of receiving a few years of education and learning in advance. It doesn't mean that you're a completely different person. Your family will still be your family, and your lover will still be your lover. That's my personal experience, as well as common knowledge in the academic world. Tim Ladd wasn't worried about revealing his secret. After all, in the past 7 years, the new generation of Dawn's children had already revealed many secrets about the cycle of reincarnation and the soul. 7 years ago, before the Ale faction's gods chose to enter the Hades, many Valkyrie gods had taken advantage of the cycle of reincarnation and reincarnated with their memories and knowledge. Even though it had only been a short 7 years, the seeds of the cycle of reincarnation had already begun to sprout, and many secrets about the cycle of reincarnation had been revealed. However, Tim Ladd's words helped Barton feel more reassured. He gathered his spirits and focused all of his attention on preparing for battle. From a certain standpoint, Barton's team didn't use the elevator to directly reach the level closest to the core area. That was because the enemy had the blueprints as well, so it was only natural that they would heavily guard the elevator entrance in the core area. No, the most direct method would probably be to weld the elevator's door shut. But if Barton's team came down ahead of time, the information would surely be leaked. Soon, the guards of the other floors would arrive here to provide reinforcements. The further down they went, the more difficult it would become. But just as Barton's team was about to set off again, someone came to find them. A white flag? Those metalheads actually know how to raise a white flag. Under the white flag was a group of cautious puppets. Compared to the clumsy puppets from before, these puppets seemed rather special. They seemed like real people. Look, their eyes seem real, and they seem so intelligent. F***CKME, that black-haired one, is actually crying. These puppets were female humanoids. Most of them had beautiful appearances and enchanting figures. Some had black hair, some had red hair, and some had purple hair. Their stature and skin color were all different. Some were wearing ball gowns, some were wearing bikinis, and some were even wearing less. Their exposed skin was no different from a real person's. It was obvious that they weren't puppets from manual labor. Although they were wearing revealing clothes, they were all secretive and wriggling around as if they didn't dare to approach. It would seem that those prehistoric people really know how to enjoy themselves. Could it be that they're seducing us? Diana whistled. However, the one who teased them wasn't a male. Instead, it was the female Diana. The dark elf generously swept her eyes over the female puppet's sensitive areas. Not only did she gesticulate, she even made strange hand gestures. In the end, she looked down at her full breasts in satisfaction and smiled proudly. It was as if Diana felt that the dark elves were superior to the exquisite fake flowers. Could it be that they intend to negotiate? As the leader of the group, old Barton took the first step forward. His warhammer was still at his feet, but he suddenly waved his spear. His sword energy left a mark on the ground, a dividing line that indicated to the dark elves that they shouldn't get too close. This caused the surrounding people to reevaluate the seemingly ordinary old Barton. After all, casually waving out sword energy was already something that only a sword saint could do. This old mercenary, who was a bit older than him, saw it. Fast Asta, a white-haired female puppet, spoke up anxiously. However, that string of numbers gave everyone else a headache. Fortunately, Timlad immediately translated for her. They say that they're master's servants and slaves. It turned out that they were artificial souls created by their master. However, after they obtained their sense of self, they felt that they should obey society's laws and thank their creators for being able to serve them. And so, their furious master forced them into these puppets from the olden generation as punishment. When they learned that their true master had returned with reinforcements, they voluntarily came over to help out. However, after Timlad finished translating this mechanical code, he fell into deep thought. Since he was an expert from the Halettum generation, everyone naturally thought that he was thinking about something and didn't dare to disturb him. However, if Roland was here, he would unhesitatingly kick Timlad when he saw the suspicious liquid at the corner of Timlad's mouth. The previous me in my previous life was such a waste of an opportunity. I can actually buy this with money. Perhaps I should take this opportunity to accept a cute little girl. Yep, I'll use research as an excuse. That red-haired girl seems like an older sister. No, as long as I can research her properly, I can create a real older sister. Should I say that it was to be expected of those bastards, brother? As a famous myth-ranked hero, Timlad was actually thinking about such things on the battlefield while everyone was waiting for him. Lord Timlad, you've made a decision? I definitely didn't want to accept those puppets. What decision? Timlad's expression was filled with astonishment, and he accidentally said something. However, the next instant, he had a calm expression, as if his slip of the tongue was nothing more than an illusion. Oh. Yep, I understand now. From a professional standpoint, the leap from artificial intelligence to artificial souls is equivalent to the awakening of self-awareness. Every individual is different, and when considering how the old generation treated artificial intelligence, theoretically speaking, what they said makes sense. However, I'll need to carefully research the specifics by myself. Yep, let's start with that red-haired girl. Everyone around him had helpless expressions. Perhaps Timlad's words were quite professional and righteous, and his expression was filled with righteousness, making him seem quite convincing. However, his claw that was making a caressing motion revealed his true thoughts. This little pervert, stinky brat. However, Barton was in a difficult situation. He had already said before that Timlad would be in charge of the ruins, and his decisions had been quite reliable. However, Barton didn't dare to believe that Timlad was acting like this. No, there's no need to think about it anymore. Kill them all. At this moment, Catalina, who was still sitting down and resting, spoke up calmly. Not only were the dolls stunned by her words, even Barton's companions paused in surprise. However, the next instant, Barton unhesitatingly carried out his daughter's order. He continuously swung his spear, and a blade formed from sword energy tore apart a black-haired doll. Seeing that Barton, the leader, had already acted, the others naturally wouldn't wait any longer. They immediately began killing the dolls. Wait, at least leave one behind. Leave one behind. I'll make it, and everyone can get rich together. Unfortunately, nobody listened to him. Even the two Northlands girls who were quite close to him pretended not to see him. No, they were already pretending not to recognize him. These dolls obviously didn't have any combat abilities at all, so they were soon reduced to a pile of scrap. Amidst the pile of broken limbs, a certain engineer was silently crying, as if he had just lost his most beloved family member. It was obvious that his companions weren't as sentimental as him. Catalina walked over and spoke to the doll's head that had just spoken. A doll will always be a doll? Do you want to know where you exposed yourself? Do you want to know where you went wrong? However, there was no response even after a long while. Just as everyone thought that Katerina was overthinking things, the bionic eyes on the doll's head lit up again, and it suddenly spoke. This time, it didn't speak in the strange female voice's digital code. Instead, it spoke in the common male language with a cold, synthetic male voice. Strange, this should be completely true to the situation. Not only that, I also took into account a man's desire to mate, which should be able to affect your judgment. Even if you don't believe my words, as long as you read the information in my words, I should be able to lead you to a dead end. How would you see through me? And so, Catalina chuckled as she suddenly stomped down on the doll's head. Why should I tell you? The next instant, she covered her foot and jumped up. It was obvious that this metal head wasn't something that her tiny foot could handle. And so, the mysterious, cold, and capable woman image that she had just established completely disappeared. Asterisk crack. Asterisk Barton, who felt heartache for his daughter, directly stomped on the doll's head and smashed it into smithereens while glaring at everyone around him to tell them not to laugh. However, his gaze towards Catalina was now filled with much more love and gentleness. After all, he had seen many women jumping up and down with tears in their eyes. It was just that it was only the foot of an ordinary table that dealt a critical blow to Catalina. Wonderful, that brat wasn't lying. She's still that clumsy, kind, and good child. She actually didn't tell me that all of this would happen. Damned Roland, I'm going to get even with you when I get back. Once her father regained his rationality and Catalina regained her stamina, it was time for her to resume her journey. Right now, she wasn't too far away from her target, the core area. Not long after she began her journey, Tim Ladd, who couldn't hold back his curiosity, came over to ask Catalina about this. When Catalina replied, many ears inexplicably gathered around her, wanting to hear more gossip. You saw through it? You didn't see through it? There's no precedent of artificial intelligence awakening on such a large scale, so how could I possibly make such a judgment? Your judgment was correct. It's highly likely that artificial souls will appear in the future. However, our most important task right now is to go to the core area. How can we trust a guide who came out of her own volition at such a time? We should just kill her and steal her information. I just didn't expect that she would be exposed so easily. It would seem that artificial souls are still lacking in terms of human nature. Then aren't you afraid of killing the wrong person? Artificial souls can't lie in front of their master. The more I think about it, the more I feel that she was telling the truth. If I kill the wrong person, I kill the wrong person. I can kill the wrong person, but I can't let the wrong person go. Also, why are you such a sissy? You're still making such a fuss at a time like this. You're not manly at all. Catalina ran to the front as she said such valiant words to Tim Ladd. Tim Ladd, who had just paused in surprise, finally understood why the person in front of him had become the commander-in-chief of the Sky Tower. Right, since you're the product of a collective soul fusion, that doesn't mean that the original soul must have been female, right? Could it be that you're a real man? I'm a woman. All right, then. It would seem that Tim Ladd really needed to change his bad habit of accidentally spilling the beans. Sooner or later, he would die. Catalina suddenly turned around and kicked Tim Ladd right between his legs. Tim Ladd immediately clutched his vitals and knelt down, causing all the men present to instinctively feel a chill and pain. Chapter 5:26. Actually, there are some things that we can discuss, such as the possibility of the undead coexisting with the living, or the future of the Tark Republic, or the fact that I have a wonderful place where I don't have to fight to the death with this world. I wasn't lying at all. Everything I had said to conservation was 100% true. Not only had I considered the possibility of reaching a peaceful agreement with the Tark Republic, I had even considered providing the Tark Republic with a piece of land in the mortal plane. The Land of Spring isn't located in Aichi, but no matter if its population potential, future development, or resources, it won't be any inferior to Aichi's. Indeed, since the new cycle of reincarnation was gradually replacing the old cycle of reincarnation, it would be far too much of a waste to just use a piece of land as a vassal of the Hell of Hades. However, thanks to the hard work of the Titans who had the authority to create the Land of Spring, the Land of Spring was now more than 100 times larger than it had been 7 years ago. The Land of Spring was blessed by the creator goddesses, and the diligent Titans were constructing it. The gods all had their own responsibilities, but they were forbidden from directly interfering with the mortal world. Under the protection of the Four Seasons god, it was quite simple for the gods to have spring all year round. Good weather was also the result of artificial rainfall and the agricultural calendar in my magical world. Thanks to so many factors, crops grew at an insane rate. Watermelons that were even larger than pigs were no exaggeration. From a certain standpoint, since the climate, the fertility of the soil, and even the growth limits of crops could all be changed at will, how much crops could be produced per moo would depend on how daring one was. I had originally planned to use the Ark as a temporary means of escape, but thanks to the spoils from the Battle of the Hades, it could be said that the Land of Spring was already a paradise. I had never imagined that the creator goddesses and true gods who had control over the natural laws would actually be able to develop to such a degree when doing something serious. What a pity. If it wasn't for that damned holy war, what would Aichi have developed to after so many years? So it's all my fault? When I received the report, I casually sighed, and Astria ignored me for 2 months. She remained abnormally silent all this time. Even if the cycle of Hades brought a large number of newborns into the Land of Spring, this still wasn't enough in this new world where the number of newborns was increasing exponentially. Not to mention the fact that newborns needed a long period of growth before they could become laborers, as well as countless nannies and dads. Although this sounded ridiculous, since newborns made up such a large proportion of the population, not only did taking care of newborns become an important industry in the Land of Spring, it actually made the already insufficient young labor force even worse. A brand new world would require an endless amount of new population. Getting some new residents from Ike to enter the new world had long since been an option for me. Even the dead have desires. Don't tell me that you came here just for a tour. What was shown on the memory crystal ball was a world that was becoming vaster and vaster. This was the magnificent scenery of the Land of Spring. After all, illusions were meaningless to existences at our level. I can understand what the senators are thinking, but could you please consider that it's still possible for us to coexist? The great majority of wars were fought for the sake of the country and its people. Bastards who started wars based on personal grudges and ambitions would either be tyrants or incapable rulers. Their fates would always be quite pitiful. The senators of the Tark Republic were no idiots. I learned from Aso's memories that they all had their own plans to begin with. Some wanted to return to the mortal plane, while others had no intentions of leaving. Conservation, who was currently before me, had only chosen to participate in this grand ceremony of returning to the mortal plane due to Aso's invitation. The regression faction had returned to this world, even going so far as to start a war against the Tark Republic, not only for the sake of flesh and souls. Such an idea would be an insult to the undead emperors. Large amounts of ordinary flesh, blood, and souls would only be useful to low-level and high-level undead. However, the undead emperors wouldn't lack such things. To them, flesh, blood, and souls would be an inexhaustible strategic resource. If they didn't have enough, they could simply send others to collect them. Dimensional harvesting wasn't something that only the demon lords could do. Everyone's loyalty and faith in the Tark Republic is admirable, but the ideals of the Tark Republic include tolerance. Why must we fight to the death? Indeed, from the very start, if the undead emperors who refused to return to the Tark Republic for various reasons could be considered to be pragmatists, then the regression faction, which was determined to return to the Tark Republic, even if it meant going to war against the gods, was actually a group of idealists who were loyal to the Tark Republic. If we scatter to countless undead plains and allow our comrades to slowly reach their end over the endless years, who will still remember the Tark Republic after another 10 million years? Who will still remember the seniors who came from the wilderness? This wasn't an unnecessary worry. There was no such thing as an immortal dynasty. The fact that the Tark Republic was able to maintain loose communication even after the Tark Republic was destroyed was already a special reason why undead magic was so powerful. Judging from the undead emperors who already had other ideas, many of the Tark Republic's ancient elders had already lost their loyalty to the Tark Republic. Even more had completely disappeared from this world for various reasons. The inheritance of a country or a people would always be passed on between the old and the new. The old would one day die, and the new would one day replace the old. Of course, Aso and the others knew about such a simple path. In their eyes, there was only one path for the Tark Republic to survive. The dream of re-establishing the Tark Republic is even more alluring, but it doesn't have to be in Aichi. There are plenty of empty territories in the Land of Spring, more than enough for you to re-establish a grand new Tark Republic. I can even open up the immigration system so that you can have new citizens who are still alive. The Regression faction believed that the only way to continue the Tark Republic was to establish a new territory for the living to live in. Then, the Tark Republic would absorb living citizens and pass down its inheritance, culture, spirit, and knowledge. This would allow the ancient Tark Republic to once again return to its former homeland, allowing this puddle of stagnant water to flow once more. My immigration proposal seemed to be able to complete the Tark Republic's inheritance from a different angle. It was just that it wouldn't be in Aichi. My proposal caused conservation to fall silent. The weight of my proposal was far too great. Even she couldn't help but seriously consider the possibility I proposed. Even though the body that was supposed to be an illusion was right in front of me, I could still feel the temperature of that physical body and the frightening power contained within it. Of course, there was also the frightening stubbornness and extreme nature of an undead. The Tark Republic hadn't forgotten its former glory even after suffering for tens of thousands of years. Even if it was a war against the entire world, it was all for the sake of passing down its own civilization and culture. The Regression faction was indeed amazing. I also respected their ideals. I had seriously considered the possibility of the Tark Republic and the Tark Republic coexisting together. However, I hadn't mentioned this before because I already knew the result: stop the war. Actually, I don't like war either. I can also sense the truth from your words. But regrettably, such a proposal was impossible to realize from the very start. Nobody will be able to stop the Tark Republic's revival. My arrival here is only the beginning. Behind her calm words was a resolute resolution. Just as I had thought, she wanted to use words to stop the war. There would be no room for negotiation from the very start. Once a country entered a period of total war, all its industries and citizens would be in a special state of war. It would be like a train at maximum speed. How could it possibly stop at a whim? 13 undead emperors from the Regression faction and the Neutral faction were participating in the Tark Republic's revival. Now that the Tark Republic's revival blueprint was placed in front of all the Tark Republic citizens, and this grand plan was accepted by all the Tark Republic citizens. Even if an undead emperor decided to tell everyone to stop, who would be able to? The Bardi Empire's battle continued. The Bardi Empire's army was also led by an undead emperor. From the very start, this was no longer the undead calamity from 300 years ago. This was a dimensional war that involved multiple dimensions. The war would only escalate. And no matter how nice my words were, or how many bargaining chips I put on the table, how much trust the undead emperors would have would be a problem. Who could guarantee that the Tark Republic wouldn't meet with even stronger enemies in that new land? Fine, I did indeed make things difficult for her in this aspect. Or perhaps it would be impossible for the Tark Republic to live in. Most importantly, treaties made before a war were usually the fastest to be broken. Treaties made between the victorious country and the defeated country were the strongest. Since the Tark Republic hadn't shown any signs of defeat yet, they would be able to rely on their military strength to take over their homeland that they had always dreamed of. Why would they need to hope for the Tark Republic's kindness and charity? If I agree to your conditions, then what would Aso's sacrifice count for? All right, then, should I say that it was to be expected of an emotional woman? Even though I had already expected to be rejected, this was indeed a reason that I hadn't expected. If this war can end so easily, then what would all the people who sacrificed themselves before this matter? Such a familiar way of thinking. However, I don't believe that Aso would want this war to continue. All right then, the next instant, a naked killing intent pressed down on me. It would seem that women were truly unreasonable. Only you could mention this name, not me. It's been far too difficult to fight to this extent. For the sake of the people who have already been sacrificed, I absolutely need to obtain a price sufficient to comfort Valkyrie. Although I can understand this, I hated this way of thinking. This seemingly romantic way of thinking made it so that neither side would ever be satisfied with what they had obtained. When two sides fought, there would definitely be losses and sacrifices. And as long as both sides weren't satisfied, the war would constantly escalate, with their strategic goals constantly increasing. In the end, even if the final result was a battle to the death, if both sides looked back at their losses, the victors would still obtain a large amount of rubble. As for controlling the scale and scope of the war, the instigators of all previous world wars had probably thought about this before. After all, very few normal people would want to conquer the world from the very start. War will always be called righteous, but it will never have anything to do with true righteousness. This had always been my way of thinking. Perhaps this was also ironic. Nobody would understand the evil of war better than a war criminal who had started countless wars. Even though I hated war to the core, I still planned one war after another and dealt with one annoying war after another. No matter how dirty my methods were, no matter how ugly I looked, I had to win each and every damned war. As expected, we all deserve to go to hell. But right now, no matter how dissatisfied I was, I didn't intend to say any meaningless questions. Since the undead emperor had already made up her mind, any more words would be nothing but nonsense. What I hated the most was nonsense. That was why I wouldn't have even come here if it wasn't necessary. In that case, please accept these small gifts of my goodwill. Perhaps I can show them to the other semi-gods. Refusing didn't mean that this trip would be a waste. Although it was impossible to stop the war, once the war was over, both sides would return to the negotiation table. At that time, establishing a relationship with each other and laying down a foundation would be of some positive use. Perhaps only when both sides were tired of fighting and had enough deaths would this proposal truly be put on the negotiation table. I could do that. And so, she accepted the exquisite box. This was an elven-style golden treasure chest. She opened the lid, revealing 7 crystal cores that were glowing brilliantly on an expensive dark red cloth. Now then, let's talk about the main topic of this trip. Should I comment on this? As expected, for women, national affairs and war were only minor matters. Things between a man and a woman were more important. It would seem that she had patiently listened to me for the sake of this moment. Aso's message? It's also in this box. I watched as Conservation's steady arm began to tremble, and even the colors around her suddenly darkened. Even a powerful undead emperor would reveal her weakness in front of her emotions. I closed my eyes and sighed helplessly. You're the one. Treasure Chest, Monster Harlois. Activated. Chapter 5:27. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 13th day of the 5th month in the 7th year of the Dawn Era, a tremendous earthquake occurred near Starwood City in the center of the Soliductum. The origin of the earthquake was unknown. Although the tremor wasn't too strong, it affected a surprisingly large area. Nearby towns and cities could feel the violent shaking. Some buildings even collapsed. Fortunately, most residents had already taken shelter. The earthquake affected a large area, to the extent that even the capital city, which was several thousand kilometers away, could feel the tremors. According to eyewitnesses, the undead were retreating at the time of the earthquake, and the tremors originated from the undead's location. Apart from the tremors, some golden flashes could also be seen. If this was all there was to it, it wouldn't even be worth mentioning in history. However, in a mage country's most authoritative mage newspaper, Truth, next week, there was such a piece of news. The largest magical wave ever recorded in the history of the Solid Dukedom has been detected. According to the theory of energy wave transmission, it can only be the largest energy explosion ever recorded in the history of the mage country. That energy explosion has already surpassed the energy limit of all forbidden spells. If it was the work of a certain senior archmage, we should congratulate him for creating a new record. According to the information we received, there was no expected explosion. Theoretically speaking, that explosion should have been powerful enough to blow a mountain into the sky, rewrite the world, and even create several man-made volcanoes. However, the strange part is that our people didn't receive any reports. In fact, even the towns and cities near the source of the explosion are still perfectly fine. Although most mages didn't care about pure power, it would be inconceivable for them to have no reaction to such a frightening energy storm. And when the classical theory clashed with the current situation, it attracted even more attention. After Truth was published, countless archmages began researching this event. Just as the magazine had guessed, everyone originally believed that some archmage had made another breakthrough and cast a powerful forbidden spell. However, there were no signs of an explosion, and there wasn't even any mana vacuum caused by powerful magical waves. There were indeed archmages present, but there were no signs of a forbidden spell being cast. This meant that either the mage's measurement methods and classical theory were wrong, or that an explosion that could blow up half a continent didn't even kill a fly. People always looked forward to the unknown. Nobody would be able to stop the mage's curiosity. However, when news spread that the mana ripples from this explosion were 7 times stronger than the most powerful forbidden spell, as well as another strange piece of news, the mages fell into a strange silence. Then, suddenly, large-scale destructive forbidden spells suddenly became a hot research topic. Even if we can only see the destructive power and the magnificence of the explosion, we can't lose to those old antiques. All right then, perhaps it was the explosive power of a certain ancient artifact that had lived for tens of millions of years that had hurt the self-esteem of a certain mage who had spent his entire life pursuing explosives. However, 3 powerful forbidden spells had actually popped up in just 2 short years. It seemed that it wasn't necessarily a bad thing to be stimulated. Let's not talk about the boring pride of being a mage for now. And let's not talk about the historical impact of this major event known as the Starwood Explosion. At the very least, the power of this explosion was recorded in history. Should he be dead? I don't know. In any case, my doppelganger was directly destroyed. Also, I strongly condemn what you just said. What do you mean by treasure chest, monster Heloise? The next time you put my name together with that unesthetic creation, I'll... What are you afraid of? I feel that you're both shameless and unafraid of death. You're such a pain in the ass. As the silly cat casually ridiculed me, she was still thinking about ways to make me afraid. Meanwhile, I was thinking about how much easier my plan had succeeded than I had expected. It wasn't a new trick to reveal one's true intentions. However, the fact that countless assassins had used this trick over and over again was proof of its excellent applicability. I would use the excuse of talking about serious matters to attract Harlow's attention. Then, I would toss out the real topic at hand. That memory crystal that contained Asso's scattered memories actually contained the incredibly dangerous Salos crystal. And it was indeed correct to call Heloise a treasure chest monster. That exquisite golden box had been transformed by Heloise using a doppelganger. The camouflage layer that covered the real Salos crystal and disguised it as a large memory crystal was also created by Heloise. Being able to obtain such frightening power in the end was both luck and planning. Man proposes, God disposes. This time, it seemed that the heavens were finally on my side. Conservation was so excited that she immediately activated the memory crystal. She couldn't help but want to see even more as she looked at Asso's familiar voice and smile. And so, she directly activated the other 6 memory crystals. And in order to detonate the Salos crystal, all an archmage would need to do was pour mana into it. This was a common method for most magical tools. When Conservation discovered that one of the 7 memory crystals was flawed, she thought that she had accidentally damaged the crystal's properties, so she anxiously increased her mana output. An archmage's mana wouldn't be enough to activate such a high-level explosion. All he would do was act as a trigger, a switch that would cause the Salos crystal to rapidly overload. And once this process began, it would be quite difficult to stop. I didn't know if the archmage affected by the explosion would die, but it was highly likely that the archmage who triggered the explosion wouldn't survive. His physical body and the Salos crystal formed an energy circuit. Detonating the Salos crystal would be the equivalent of detonating the Salos crystal's body. It would be a complete suicide. If that was the case, then the power of the explosion would naturally be related to the caster's mana and the Salos crystal's energy reserves. However, in most situations, a mage's mana wouldn't even be worth mentioning in front of a Salos crystal's energy reserves. The explosion wouldn't change much. But this time I encountered Conservation. She herself was a treasure trove of energy. And so, when Conservation discovered that her mana was furiously leaking out of her Salos crystal, she was unable to stop. I didn't know if she would recognize this Salos crystal that had once come from another civilization. But if she was still alive after this, she would definitely remember it. Of course, I couldn't possibly bet everything on the possibility that Conservation would fall for my trap. If she calmly accepted the Salos crystal without inspecting it, Heloise's Salos crystal would automatically pour mana into the Salos crystal and forcefully detonate the Salos crystal. I would then drag Heloise into that special territory and kill her. Of course, if things develop like that, then the explosion's power and success rate would be greatly reduced. And it was precisely because Conservation's own energy had been detonated that this explosion's power would become history. I'll transform into Princess Peach. I'll run naked together with Eagle Storm. No, I'll strip as I run. I'll run right outside the little Fairies magazine office. I'm going to make you appear on the headlines. I couldn't help but chuckle upon hearing this. She was actually still thinking of ways to make me afraid. I didn't say anything else when I saw how proud the silly cat was. I hurriedly lower my head. Please don't. Lowering my head wouldn't be shameful at all. It would be shameful if I appeared on the headlines. But just as we relaxed, a sharp howl pierced through every single soul's eardrums. Roland. Damn Roland. All right, then. Judging from that familiar voice, our troubles weren't over yet. Suddenly, another angry howl came from another direction. This was also an incredibly familiar voice. Roland, you're here? The person that I had been hiding from all this time had finally arrived. I didn't even know where to run. Chapter 528. What if Amelia comes? Cold dish. Do you think she'll chop you up and make you into a cold dish? That's true. Should I ask her to share a bowl with me? When I mentioned Amelia, the silly cat pretended that she didn't understand my slang. But how could my thoughts through our soul connection possibly be different because of my language? She was simply mocking me with evil intentions. I had rather complex feelings about Amelia. After all, she treated me quite well back in the day, and I made her suffer. And in this life, when we met again in the Northlands, she helped me without holding anything against me and solved the Northlands food problem. This was already 2 major favors. Plus, I made her suffer a 3rd time at the Earth Elemental Tower, damaging her reputation, so I owed her yet another favor. I wasn't a good person, and Amelia definitely wasn't a good person either. But at the very least, she wasn't a bastard. It would be too much to repay kindness with enmity when others treated you well. That was why when Amelia tried to force me into a marriage in order to save a reputation, even I didn't know how to respond. If it wasn't for the fact that I couldn't explain myself to Eliza, I probably would have just agreed. Actually, I should have ended my single life long ago. Amelia was actually quite nice, and I owed her quite a bit as well. I also knew that she seemed to have a favorable impression of me that surpassed a teacher-student relationship. It would be nice to have a nominal marriage with her. Yep, I definitely wasn't trying to get her to marry me, but for some reason, I kept feeling like something was wrong. That's what you're thinking? I actually thought that you'd improved. Did a dog bite your head off? Oh, you lost your memory again? And you're even having selective amnesia with evil intentions? Venerable goddess of order, are you certain that you didn't do anything to him? Why does he always forget the most important part? He's hopeless. What does that have to do with me? Besides, apart from all the bad ideas on how to scam others, there's nothing unimportant in his mind. If I really want to find something unimportant, I'll probably have to start from his personal life. I still remembered how the silly cat looked at me with disdain whenever I mentioned Amelia and felt like I owed her many favors, as well as how my system mocked me. Cough, cough. You're looking at me as if I'm a heartless man. Actually, I'm already quite old, and it's about time for me to find a partner. It's also about time for the Mist family to have a new successor. After so many years, the standards for marriage have gradually decreased. Actually, I don't have high standard for a female partner. Tell me about it. Heloise was very surprised. Could it be that this guy had really activated it? I'm actually a traditional man, so I like my other half to be more traditional. She doesn't need to be beautiful or strong. It's best if she's a traditional little woman who's gentle, kind, family-oriented, knows how to cook, and knows how to act coquettishly. It doesn't matter if she's a little stupid. She'll hand me a cup of tea when I'm tired, understand my goals a little, understand my hard work, and gently say welcome back to me after work. I'll be satisfied. All right then, I'd been in high spirits as I spoke, and the more I spoke, the more excited I became. However, when I thought of the cruel truth, I suddenly realized that the more I spoke, the more boring I felt. It seemed that the women by my side were quite excellent in all aspects, but their toughness and combat strength were all a bit too high. Cough, cough. There weren't many people who met these requirements. I sympathized with Eliza. She went in the wrong direction from the beginning. This man doesn't need a comrade by his side. All he needs is a little woman who's like a caring older sister. Actually, she can wait. A man's standards for choosing a spouse aren't fixed. From a certain standpoint, he's probably just an elementary school student's love budding. It's understandable that he has excessive expectations for the future, but as time goes on, the cruel reality will viciously attack him. For example, princesses are all sloppy people who don't know how to clean their own rooms. A beautiful female knight has a sweet smile, but her brain is completely empty. Facial paralysis looks cute, but is boring at home. A dragon girl looks cute, but you need to be careful of her true form. She'll eat you for lunch. It won't take long for her to fall from a beautiful, well-educated, and understanding girl with long, straight, black hair to a girl, or even it's enough as long as she looks like a girl. Right, Kolos fits all of your requirements perfectly. Apart from the fact that she looks like a girl, she's actually still a girl. What are you hesitating for? You can use your status as your former boss to hide her in a secret room in Uniqlo. Can you not say it to my face next time you attack me? Also, what the hell is Uniqlo? How many times have I told you that Kolos is a man? Or, at least, she was in the past. Yep. Although I was indeed an honorary member of Kolos fan club, I definitely wasn't tempted. Nor did I consider whether such a descendant would be mentally or physically healthy. I'm not a pervert. Don't make wild guesses. Also, no matter what, you're still a goddess. Can't you at least have some morals? Morals? I've long since been mentally corrupted by you. I remember that I was commenting on how my system's lower and lower limits were getting, while the silly cat was mysteriously depressed. Relax, I'm not in the mood to attack you. Losing to a man in terms of female charm is quite a blow to my self-esteem. Do you want to see how similar you are to this idiot's ideal partner? The person in first place is that Kolos. She's so heartless. Let me also tell you that your ranking is actually quite high, far higher than I expected. Shut up. Otherwise, I'm going to perish together with you. Perish together? Haha. Why don't you try? Aren't you afraid that I'll sing Little Apple in your head? I'm going to go read gay magazines about muscular men. No, that won't work on you anymore. I'm going to go read the Bayphone, divine cults propaganda, and training manuals. When I finally managed to make my system shut up, I mysteriously felt like I had lost something very important. Morals? It wasn't like I could eat that, so it wasn't important at all. Perhaps what was more important was that a person with normal morals would instinctively be on guard against certain anti-human behaviors. Yep, that's right. Beifeng and his believers were quite dangerous, considering the fact that the population was decreasing due to the reproductive isolation. They had long since reached the level of anti-human and anti-social behavior. What? Beifeng had already broken through the reproductive isolation of different species, randomly creating all sorts of strange mixed blood creatures. Was no longer anti-human and anti-social. That was anti-human and anti-human-HE. Beifeng was basically the public enemy of all the dimensions. Actually, Beifeng had already entered the top 10 of the calamity rankings and was wanted by all the countries and gods. This was already the treatment of being the public enemy of all the dimensions. Cough. I should put aside the fact that Beifeng was becoming more and more like that man whose name shall not be mentioned. However, I had rather complex feelings about Amelia. I felt like I owed her a lot, but I always felt like I was lacking something when it came to marriage. Perhaps I would still have to run away when we met. But right now, I mysteriously felt happy when I saw Amelia smiling sweetly while countless vines transformed into a forest of thorns. Behind her was a towering tree covered in black mist. She's so reliable to see at such a time. Help! Hurry and save me. The ground was still violently shaking as the magical element in the area was automatically dispelled. Although it wasn't at the level of a true forbidden spell's mana vacuum, the large-scale mana fluctuations made it impossible to cast any spell. On the other side, a familiar pale white figure was circling in midair. Her death roar was filled with anger and killing intent, causing the living to instantly die. This was the special ability of an undead singer, as well as the most troublesome natural talent of all ghost-type undead creatures. What's even more troublesome than an undead emperor is an undead emperor that can't even be killed by a nuclear bomb. Not only that, she's gone berserk because of a nuclear bomb. Also, you were the one who threw that nuclear bomb. I didn't know how that female ghost had managed to escape from that terrifying explosion. However, just from the energy storm gathering in the sky, I could tell that conservation was furious and that the problem was serious. This was truly going to be a huge problem. Fortunately, our reinforcements had already arrived. Wait a moment, Amelia, aren't your vines attacking the wrong direction? Why are they attacking me instead? We're on the same side. Chapter 529. Goddess, may I know what your favorability rating is? I'm a hidden character. You want to conquer me with just 4 rounds? You won't even be able to connect to me. Buffed. So you're saying that your favorability rating is 0? No, it should be that you don't appear on my favorability rating list. Is this another explanation for not treating you as a woman? No, the more rounds you take to conquer, the stronger the character will be. Just look at that sickly girl over there. TSK, TSK, TSK. Roland really deserves it. He thinks he's special just because he's a hidden character. He didn't even consider whether or not she's special to the point of being sickly. I ignored the mocking comments in my head, as if it was a chat room. This group of people had been laughing at me for quite some time now. The ghost that was gathering the power of death in the sky was the most important thing right now. Crack. It hurts, it hurts. As the vines tightened around me, all of my bones kept cracking. Thinking about anything became an extravagant dream. All right then, I admit that the crazy woman behind me, who was currently glaring at me like a tiger, was the most important person here. Goddess and Big Sister Cat, if you have the time to chat, please save me first. The witch's demonic beauty was just like before. Her naturally curly green hair flowed in the wind, and her blood-red eyes were as beautiful as ice crystals. Of course, that was only if you ignored the fact that the vines were already tearing at my skin. Her crystal-clear eyes were filled with undisguised killing intent. Can you relax a little? Her beautiful red lips curved into an arc as she gently blew into my ear. No, you can't. Oh, her sweet breath tickled my ear. She even licked my ear ambiguously with the tip of her tongue. It was icy cold and seemed rather suggestive. Of course, the prerequisite was that I ignored the vines that were getting tighter and tighter as well as my bones, pitiful screams that were becoming louder and louder. Who knows what will happen after I let you go? Her suggestive words were sweet, as if they were tickling my heart. But the next instant, my entire body started cracking. Asterisk crack. Asterisk, the merciless cracking of my bones made me quite anxious. What was even worse was that I actually didn't feel any pain at all. This could only mean that those damn vines had already begun taking over my nervous system. While I was doing my best to order my toes to move, the soft whispers behind me suddenly turned into a stern interrogation. Tell me, run to that thieving cat. He could feel his ears again. He was actually licking, biting. He was really biting. Ouch. Hey, hey. Why are you moving your mouth? That bloody half of the ear you're chewing on, could it be mine? Although I'm grateful that you instantly made another one for me. And I know that you have the power to create life. Can you not be so horrifying? I'll have nightmares if I have to look at it like that. What a desperate situation. At this time, his life was already on the brink of danger. The trouble in the sky was no longer a problem. It wasn't so cruel and evil a year ago. There's a big difference between being rejected by a man once or twice. Am I right, darling? His current physical body was created by the other party. Being so close to the other party, he couldn't even control his own body anymore. Even his thoughts were starting to leak out. No, I'm not trying to read his mind. I have a bottom line. It's just that I can guess what you're thinking right now. However, such a desperate situation wasn't a problem for me. I had long since anticipated that today's situation would occur, which was why I had already prepared an ace up my sleeve. Even if she currently hated me to the core, the moment I said the following words, she would open her heart once more. I once had a sincere love in front of me, but I didn't properly cherish it. I only regretted it after I lost it. There's nothing more painful than this in the world. If the heavens could give me another chance, I'd say 3 words to that girl. I love you. If I had to add a time limit, I'd hope that it would be 10,000 years. How did you know? Although it's nice to hear you say some sweet words, forget about the classic lines from the classic play Romeo and Joker. Oh, I almost forgot that you were the one who wrote that play. In that case, I really should listen to it. Let's see how the original author acted out that love story that made countless girls cry. Romeo and Joker? It seemed that I had accidentally forgotten something again. But judging from the name of this thing, I was probably still in the rebellious phase of taking revenge on society. Could it be some strange thing with a wrong sexual orientation? Crying bitterly? You? No, I'm not some little girl who thinks that your love is more important than your body. If I really was that Romeo who only knew how to cry and regret, I would have long since broken all the bones in that heartless Joker's body and dragged him home. Heh, you really do feel threatened. Could you loosen the vines a little? The heavens didn't know the path of man, so I had to look on the bright side. But on the other side, where my personal safety was threatened, at least some things were naturally better. I believed that she wouldn't watch as I was killed by someone else, at least not before she took her revenge. I was still temporarily safe. Why did it sound so awkward for me to say this? In the sky, the ethereal pale ghost was gathering the power of death. There were far too many undead that had died in this land. Enough soul fragments kept floating up into the sky and being absorbed by the ghost, causing her color to become much more realistic. I could already tell what conservation was doing. She was using her own abilities to summon the power of death and undead in order to make up for what she lacked. No matter what method she had used to survive that massive explosion, she had definitely paid a tremendous price. Logically speaking, we should have attacked her while she was down like a swarm of bees. However, judging from the battle situation in the sky, it was likely that even attacking conservation in her current state would be quite difficult. Amelia hadn't come here alone. She had arrived before some others only because of a gigantic plant airship in the sky. This primitive divine tree airship resembled the first airship I had seen in the Forest of Dreams, but this airship was much larger. It appeared to be nothing more than a primitive tree with green patterns and forked branches. But judging from the high-energy reactions of its parts and the airships flying everywhere in the sky, this was definitely no airship for sightseeing. Apart from the seemingly young and cute wood spirits flying in the sky, it was also quite common to see magical plants that resembled flying birds. But the scariest part was that there were so many of them that they covered the sky. Countless strange plants and animals flew in circles in the sky. Looking up from the ground, the sky was filled with black dots. And this gigantic airship was even wider than the giant iron gates of the city walls. I recognized this airship. It was the Royal Arkansas Mother. This was a wedding gift that the wood spirits had given to celebrate their mother and father getting married. Fine then, let me continue ignoring the angry glares behind my back. There were at least 3,000 wood spirits on this airship, and at least 2 of the 7 virtues were guarding it. Should I feel honored that the wood spirits had come here, in such a treasured airship, as soon as they received news from me? Even if the undead army was still here, they would likely be quickly wiped out by this airship's fierce attacks. However, the situation in the sky wasn't like this. Conservation was leisurely absorbing the power of death amidst countless explosions and attacks. She didn't dodge, as it was impossible to dodge such a tremendous number of attacks. All the attacks directly passed through her body, but then appeared on the other side of her body. Some wood spirits even got close to her and were actually able to overlap with her, as if she didn't exist in this dimension. I had seen conservation in this state before. Back then, she had been using an incarnation of herself. She was in a hazy state between existence and non-existence. Although she was unable to interfere with her surroundings, it was also impossible for her surroundings to interfere with her. And now, conservation had obviously improved even further. The surrounding airships were unable to attack her, but she was interfering with her surroundings. She was absorbing souls and the power of death to recover herself. Back then, I had modified the dimensional laws of this world so that the heat she stole would return her own body in order to defeat her. But right now, she wasn't using her soul world to steal any energy. It was obvious that I couldn't use my previous method of defeating her. However, I wasn't completely helpless. Since I already knew that conservation had such an ability and that I might encounter her, how could I not make preparations? But the prerequisite was, Amelia, can you let go of me? I have a way to take care of her. No. Right, my dear. Do you prefer to be fried or boiled? Do you really think I can't tell that you intend to use the method I choose to take care of me? But since you want me to choose a method of death, can I recommend one? Die of old age? You've already used this joke in Ju Ingtai and Juliet. Why is your expression so subtle? I felt even more helpless as I listened to this name that made me want to comment so much. Not at all. I'm just curious about just how much I hated society back then. I hope that I can die with some dignity. It's so embarrassing that I'm still a virgin. Can you help me find several dozen succubi? I choose to die of happiness. Why am I feeling pain again now? It hurts. Chapter 530. While Roland Side was in trouble, the battle in the Halettum generation's ruins was becoming fiercer and fiercer. If your mission fails, use that blood-red signal flare, and we can immediately prepare for a large-scale retreat. This was what Roland had told Tim Ladd before he left. It was evident that although Tim Ladd had high hopes for his adventuring team and had sent enough reinforcements, Tim Ladd lacked confidence in his team's victory. Actually, I should have gone with you, but if I left, there definitely wouldn't be anyone left alive here. Roland's expression was filled with regret. Perhaps his decision would have saved more people, but it might not have been the correct strategy. From the very start, the seemingly peaceful ruins were the most important. No matter how the undead emperors fought, it would be impossible to solve this problem. Even if conservation failed, that wouldn't mean that the undead calamity would end here. The undead Emperor Tower Spirit, who was the mastermind behind the scenes, could easily use the undead calamity again. For example, they could find another undead emperor or elemental lord to make another sacrifice and cause another undead invasion or elemental calamity. Not dealing with the root cause of the undead calamity would be akin to treating the symptoms, but not the root cause. Roland understood this quite clearly. That was why even though Starwood City's front lines were under so much pressure, he still sent Timlad and the others to attack the undead calamity. The undead calamity's direct victory naturally attracted the undead Emperor Tower spirit's attention and troops. The undead Emperor Tower spirit sent all the war puppets it had created earlier to its allies as reinforcements. It could be said that the undead Emperor Tower spirit's current defense was at its weakest ever. Even so, Catalina and the others' ambush wasn't going well. Before the undead Emperor Tower spirit reacted, things had been going quite smoothly. But as time passed, and the adventuring team was getting closer and closer to the core, the undead Emperor Tower spirit sent more and more guards from the other floors. And so, more and more obstacles appeared in front of the adventuring team. All sorts of strange war puppets kept jumping out from every corner. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to attack Catalina, but they wouldn't hold back against anyone else. Now that the adventuring team was surrounded by moving metal obstacles, they could only try to break through with real weapons. In the face of danger, the mercenaries, who were used to bloodshed, had no room to retreat. They all knew that when enemies met on a narrow path, only the brave would emerge victorious. Stopping and holding back at this moment would mean death. Mercenaries were not very useful in large battles, but they were often experts in small-scale battles. At this time, a battle formation was much safer than fighting on their own. Under the command of their leader, they formed a temporary team. The warriors and knight classes were at the front, blocking the metal golems' attacks, while the archers and low-level mages were at the back. The few priests used their divine spells in the most limited areas. The most eye-catching was the magic knight from the north. Mary's magic sword flickered with colorful brilliance. It was like a brush drawing with the sky as its blueprint. Different elements with different colors formed beautiful patterns, such as a fire phoenix facing the sky, a wind lion roaring, or a rock tortoise standing firm. And after the pattern was formed, it would turn into a living magical attack in the next moment. The fire phoenix sword seal spewed out a sea of fire. Then the wind tiger exploded and blew out a whirlwind. The fire increased the power of the wind, and the sea of fire suddenly rose more than a meter high and spread to both sides. Meanwhile, the rock tortoise shattered into mysterious runes, blessing the armor of the frontline soldiers. Along the way, Mary's 4 elemental swordcaster had used over 100 high-level sword seals. Apart from showing the advantages of this new class, which combined blessing, defense, and attack into one, it also made others sigh at how deep her wallet was. She had even more backup energy. And her partner, the anti-holy knight Tiana, was in a bad situation. Her ability was good at dealing with magic, supernatural, and elemental existences. The metal golems in front of her were heavily armed with metal. It was difficult for her ability to reach the core. And if she were to use her physical body, which had lost the blessing of her supernatural abilities, to fight against the steel, it would really be a bit stupid. Since her ability was countered, Tiana naturally retreated to the second line and became Catalina's bodyguard. And when she saw how tired Catalina was, she unhesitatingly carried Catalina as they advanced. And judging from how she was still able to carry a person while wearing heavy armor and carrying a sword, it was obvious that she still had some energy left. As Timlad ran, he kept muttering to himself as if he was calculating something. Considering his reputation and his previous performance, not only did no one criticize him for not doing his job, they even sent out a shield warrior to protect him. The temporary leader of the mercenaries, Winston, was loudly shouting out directions to the mercenaries, while his old partner, the leader Barton, was charging at the front. This caused the mercenaries behind him to look at him in a new light. He just retired from the front line a few years ago, right? How did he become so much stronger? Warhammers and spears were both commonly seen heavy weapons on the battlefield. However, according to common sense, nobody would ever use them together, not even barbarians who were born with divine strength. After all, one was a blunt weapon, while the other was a sharp weapon. One used kinetic energy to injure others, while the other used the sharpness of a blade to injure others. One was heavy and slow, while the other was light and quick. Even if you had the strength to wield a heavy weapon with one hand, and even if you were talented enough to use two weapons at the same time, the imbalance between the left and right would still be quite difficult to bear. When attacking, it would be easy for one's entire body to lose balance. Losing control of one's body on the battlefield would be the same as committing suicide. But in Barton's hands, these two contradictory weapons were able to shine brilliantly. F***ck off. The irascible Barton swung the heavy weapons in his hands. His blue spear swept in all directions, forcing the steel guard puppet to continuously retreat. But the next instant, his pitch-black warhammer viciously smashed the unbalanced guard puppet into scrap metal. Barton didn't use a ranger's extravagant swinging of his twin swords. He only carefully adjusted his footwork. Sometimes, he would sweep with his spear, but most of the time, he would use his sword energy to force back his opponents. Sometimes, he would use his warhammer to attack. The faint magical runes on his warhammer increased the power of his warhammer. Barton's attacks weren't fixed. They moved as he wished, making them difficult to defend against. And when one attack was blocked, another attack would suddenly descend from the sky. Sweeping with his spear, smashing with his warhammer, and killing with the tip of his spear after losing balance. These three simple and direct attacks allowed Barton to advance unstoppably. In front of him, the metal puppets that were more than 3 meters tall were only slightly more expensive puppets. Not a single metal guardian had been able to block more than 3 of his attacks. Yet, even the half-undead, half-constructed bone giant before him was unable to block a single blow from his warhammer. Barton was in high spirits. He wielded a weapon in each hand and glared at Barton like a tiger. Then, he began spinning on the spot, unleashing berserk sword energy that sent countless enemies flying. Blade Storm. It's a sword saint. One of Barton's companions shouted out the name of this technique, as well as Barton's current ability. His spinning swords created a storm of sword energy. Without a doubt, this was a sword saint's specialty. Although this technique had the permanent side effect of making one dizzy, it was indeed quite powerful. Roland especially liked this technique. The length of Barton's 2 heavy weapons increased Blade Storm's destructive power. Barton's enemies' defenses were instantly destroyed. Barton and his companions continued fighting until they finally reached the stairs leading to the next level. There's still 3 more levels. Not long after walking down the stairs, everyone discovered that they were now on an open platform. Not far away was a flight of stairs leading to the next level. Everyone couldn't help but smile when they saw that dawn was right in front of them. However, the moment that they took a step forward, the dim yellow lights all lit up. The white stone tiles on the ground were all glowing as if they were diamonds. As they walked on the shiny tiles, they could see themselves as if they were mirrors. Even the most reckless person would know that they couldn't easily enter such a place. Meanwhile, Catalina, who was drenched in sweat, immediately gave them instructions. Be careful. This is a spirit creature creation room. It's a training field for the Guardian Warriors to train in. As long as you enter, you'll be able to extract the strongest warrior from that person's memories. You'll be able to use the database to make up for the missing information and create a spirit warrior with the same impression. However, their energy is limited. As long as we repeatedly send the weakest person in, we'll be able to use up all of their energy. Father. Before she even finished speaking, Barton, who had just finished his Blade Storm and still hadn't regained his balance, took 2 steps forward. He was dizzy and didn't even have the time to listen to Barton's explanation before all the light enveloped him. The next moment, everything returned to normal. However, not far away, a grayish-white figure walked out of the shadows. He wasn't very tall, and his blonde hair was covered in dust. His face was covered in a thick beard, making it impossible to see his face clearly. He didn't seem to have any frightening aura, and he wasn't even wearing armor. He only wore a tattered white cloak and held a wooden club as he stood there in a sloppy manner. Not long ago, Barton was just a drunkard who only drank and fooled around. But for some reason, everyone felt that it would be impossible to take even half a step forward. Everyone immediately froze over. However, The first person to speak up was the newly born spirit creature. Not only that, he spoke in an incredibly calm tone of voice. I'm quite afraid of trouble. Let's all attack together. Chapter 531. If one only looked at his outer appearance, his dirty clothes were covered in dust, his blonde hair was messy, and there were patches all over his clothes. He looked like a drunkard that could be found in any bar. However, as he stood there, yawning and picking his ears, there was no image to speak of, but it gave people a sense of distance that could not be crossed. 3 minutes had passed, and none of the witnesses dared to take even half a step forward. Everyone instinctively warned themselves. Perhaps he seemed safe right now, but as long as they took another step forward, they would be attacked and cut in half. What the worst opponent, Caro? No, Sword Saint Roland. Barton shouted out this name through gritted teeth. However, what followed was an overwhelming desire to fight. Perhaps this person really was the teacher who taught him sword techniques, but Barton had been unhappy with Caro for a very long time. Perhaps this was his chance to take revenge and defeat Caro. The future god of war's eyes were bloodshot, and he didn't even bother to hide his killing intent. Perhaps this was an obstacle for others, but for Barton, it was a rare chance to challenge himself. Hurry up and come at me together. I still want to go back and rest. Caro didn't even open his eyes to look at Barton as he chatted idly. Caro's disdain was clearly conveyed. I don't know how well he imitated his power, but he really did imitate his innate nature that deserves a beating. Barton unhesitatingly attacked first. The moment he attacked, he spun in place and transformed into a storm of swords. He knew that he couldn't afford to be careless in the slightest when facing this person, even if it was only a projection. He immediately used his ultimate attack. Isn't Caro a mage? Didn't this thing duplicate the strongest martial artist in Barton's memories? Why did he appear? How could the other mercenaries not recognize Caro? He was a drinking companion that they drank together and bragged about. Although Caro had recently revealed his identity as an undead mage and seemed to have a very high status, and although they didn't know why his duplicate had appeared here, nobody believed that Barton would lose. After all, it was common sense that a person's energy was limited. Caro sounded quite young, and he wasn't some long-lived species. It was already quite rare for him to be able to accomplish something in one area, let alone dual cultivation. Meanwhile, old Barton had immersed himself in martial arts for at least 30 years. Perhaps there's something wrong with this thing. Wasn't old Barton always worried that his daughter would be abducted by Carlo? In a sense, a son-in-law was indeed the strongest opponent of a father-in-law who was obsessed with his daughter. Yes, and an opponent that will be defeated one day. Some people were making sarcastic remarks, while others looked shocked or worried. Those who truly knew that person knew how worrying it was when that person appeared in the opponent's camp. At this moment, Timlad had even stopped his calculations. His face was filled with worry as he looked at the situation in front of him. He asked Catalina this question. This spirit creature shouldn't be able to completely imitate it, right? Is there an upper limit or limit? So this is a facility for warriors to practice their martial arts. Man-made spiritual creatures can't control the elements, so it's impossible for them to use magic. This should be considered a restriction. Of course, there was an upper limit. This device's ability was limited, and it could only simulate the combat strength of legend-ranked individuals at most. However, martial arts information could be extracted from the target's memories, as well as supplemented from the spirit world. It was almost a complete simulation. Actually, it didn't matter. How could an ordinary legend-ranked individual possibly be a match for my father, who is a sword saint? And Carlo, he's a sickly person. Catalina was quite confident in her father's abilities, especially since Carlo was physically weak. His strength wasn't even as great as hers, and he would complain incessantly at the slightest bit of hard work. Martial arts techniques required the physical body as the foundation. In the end, martial arts techniques were just a way to strengthen the physical body and use the physical body. Due to natural differences, goblins would never be able to defeat giants in arm wrestling no matter how much they cultivated. In that case, Carlo's physical body was already weak to begin with, so he definitely wouldn't be able to pose a threat to her father. It was always good to make calculations before a battle. And this training ground simulation abilities had both a limit and an upper limit, as well as a power limit. This should have been a good thing, but the more Catalina spoke, the more bitter Tim Ladd's expression became. Judging from the information he just obtained, he no longer had any hopes of making a breakthrough. It would seem that there's no other method apart from using up all the spiritual creature's energy. That can't be right. Carlo's really weak. Before he even finished speaking, Barton, who had high hopes for him, was sent flying backwards. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the floor tiles were smashed apart. The bald old man's head was injured, and the web between his thumb and forefinger was split open. It was quite a serious injury. Meanwhile, his opponent was still standing there with a wooden stick in his hand. His eyes were closed as if he was about to fall asleep. How'd he do it? In everyone's eyes, Barton had an overwhelming advantage and initiative in this battle. The spiritual creature, Roland, had only been constantly retreating, ready to tear Barton apart with his whirlwind sword. However, the next instant, it was Barton who was sent flying backwards. Tim Ladd's recording device was replaying the scene from just now, but he still couldn't see anything. In the end, after the recording was slowed down by several dozen times, he finally saw everything clearly. He clearly saw all of Roland's movements while spinning at high speed. He lured Roland into digging a hole with his sword, and then lured Roland into stepping into his own hole. He lured Roland into self-destructing just by moving. The difference in combat techniques and experience is far too obvious. But since he saw through everything, why didn't he just use his sword to stop Roland? Why did he have to go through so much trouble? Look, not only did this spiritual creature inherit Roland's combat experience, he even inherited Roland's twisted personality. Although Tim Ladd was inwardly commenting on Roland's strange personality, he had a serious expression. Victory was right in front of him, but he was stopped here. Of course he was displeased. Perhaps this is the worst opponent we've ever met. Father is clearly a sword saint. Isn't it said that sword saints have the ability to challenge those at a higher power level than themselves? Catalina wasn't skilled in martial arts, but she was able to compare information and statistics. As a barmaid, she had many legendary stories of sword saints defeating stronger opponents. Sword saint? Ha! The one standing right in front of me is perhaps the strongest sword saint Aichi has ever produced in the last 300 years. Tim Ladd had a helpless expression. He wasn't exaggerating at all. Ever since the Hades were established, much information had been obtained from the Gentleman Alliance. Even Tim Ladd was astonished by Roland's inhuman past. Have you heard of the Red Lotus Sword Saint Adam? Yep, he's the one who's viewed as the strongest sword saint of the current generation. He's also a strong competitor for the title of the strongest human. Tim Ladd noticed that everyone was staring at him as he spoke, so he paused for a moment. He was worried that saying this would affect the mercenaries' morale, but he was also worried that others would be foolish enough to challenge him if he didn't explain himself. The Red Lotus Sword Saint's teacher is this person right in front of you. He's the one who single-handedly taught the strongest sword saint of the current generation. Since this clone has copied his terrible personality and swordsmanship, who do you think will be able to defeat him in swordsmanship? This time, not only were the mercenaries shocked, even Barton himself was stunned. He didn't know that he had such a famous senior brother, nor did he know that this sloppy-looking young man had such a glorious past. It said that he became a sword saint after only 1 year of swordsmanship cultivation. He's so talented in swordsmanship that he can imitate others' profound mysteries just by looking at them twice. He knows more than 20 profound mysteries and the vast majority of common swordsmanship techniques. In fact, he's even taught 3 sword saints to his disciples. Are you all certain that you can defeat such an existence? All right then, the moment I said this, everyone instantly fell silent. All of you, come at me together. The same words, but different reactions. Since Roland displayed his astonishing power, this time, no one dared to refute this man who was wearing a grayish-white cloak while pretending to be a thinker and standing at a 45-degree angle to show off. He even copied his personality. He completely copied him. Huh, we finally have hope. That Winston over there, yep, you bring out your pride as a legend-ranked mercenary and challenge him. That's right, just you alone. We don't need you to win. Just do your best to use your ultimate attacks on him and waste his stamina. As Tim Ladd made his arrangements, the device in his peripheral vision already showed him the results of the battle. His combat strength, his strength, agility, and stamina aren't even at 5 points, and he's so good at acting. He almost scared us. That's right. Since this was a replica of the real Roland, it was only natural that this replica would also copy Roland's current weak state. Even if Roland was able to defeat Roland by relying on his experience and techniques, his incredibly weak body wouldn't be able to handle much stamina consumption. Rather than directly fighting against Roland and defeating him, it would be better to take turns to exhaust Roland's stamina. Spiritual and elemental creatures' stamina and energy were the same. As long as they ran out of stamina, they would naturally disappear. However, Winston, who had high hopes for him, didn't even last for half a minute before he was sent flying out by a sword energy that just happened to cut through his helmet. Casually tossing out sword energy? Sword energy requires stamina as well. Don't attack him together. That'll give him a chance to borrow power and create chaos. Let's attack him one by one. Since this is a training device, there's definitely a restriction on killing people. There might even be restrictions on attacking or leaving this area. All right then, all of Roland's weaknesses have been figured out. This time, it was the spiritual body Roland's turn to smile wryly and helplessly. But before the next warrior could carry out this shameless plan, the already injured old Barton rushed out first. He didn't intend to give up on this rare opportunity to challenge Roland. All of you back off. This is my personal challenge. Your courage is commendable, and you're also commendable for taking advantage of opportunities to improve yourself. However, you're completely unqualified to be the leader of the army and let your emotions affect your decisions. While Tim Ladd inwardly cursed Roland, he was actually cheering him on. Although Barton's answer just now had caused him to lose a lot of points in the eyes of the examiners, since someone was willing to be cannon fodder and exhaust the spiritual sword saint stamina, why not? Chapter 532. Sword saints weren't often seen in the world of He. In fact, sword saints weren't even a power level. They were simply a glorious title. Fairy sword saint, human sword saint, beastman sword saint. This glorious title transcended levels and was bestowed upon those swordsman warriors who specialized in martial arts cultivation. Their trademark was the ability to release sword energy from their bodies at will. He wasn't a mystical world where battle energy was rampant and shockwaves were everywhere. Martial artist training was based on training their physical bodies, slowly increasing their physical strength. If a martial artist didn't come into contact with elemental power or had a supernatural bloodline, even if they trained to the peak, they would still be nothing more than a powerful melee fighter. In other words, since they were unable to release sword energy, they would forever be nothing more than melee fighters. In that case, to high-level mages, they would still be nothing more than tough sandbags. That was why even though sword energy seemed unremarkable, it was often the difference between life and death for pure warriors. Only the sword saints themselves knew that stepping into the sword saint realm actually meant breaking through the barrier between themselves and the outside world, establishing some sort of special connection. Their will and killing intent would transform into actual power, and the power within their bodies would be able to transform into sword chi to injure others. It would also be possible to grasp the profound meaning of large-scale killing swordsmanship, turning the impossible into the possible. Didn't this sound familiar? The world of He also had so-called saint-ranked existences. These were existences that were above legend rank. They were powerful individuals who had reached the level of saints. Their unique characteristic was that they were able to communicate with the outside world and transform their will into power that could affect reality. Everything originated from a soul. A sufficiently powerful soul's will would be able to distort the natural laws of the world and affect the world. Being able to do this would make one an extraordinary saint. Only the sword saints themselves knew that becoming a sword saint was only the beginning. There's too much of a difference. The flat training field was now littered with bodies. The mercenaries were helplessly moaning on the ground, while Roland's spirit clone was standing there in boredom. This wasn't the result of fighting for 3 days and 3 nights. Instead, it was the result of only 10 minutes. The mercenaries followed Timlad's instructions and went up one by one to exhaust their opponent's stamina. However, they discovered that if their opponents collapsed instantly, they wouldn't even be able to exhaust their stamina. In the end, they were forced into a corner, and everyone went up together. 12 seconds? Or 11 seconds? Forget it. It's meaningless. It's like an adult bullying a child. He's not serious at all. The mercenaries finally saw what a great sword saint was like when he used his full strength. Even though his arms were so weak that he could only pick up a wooden stick, a casual wave of his sword key storm was comparable to a tornado in real life. If you were fast enough, you would be hit first before you even realized he was drawing his sword. 12 people went up, and 12 streaks of sword chi were sent down. They did not waver in the profound meaning, because the opponent in front of them was not worthy. This was blatant disdain. The incarnation didn't even bother to use its venomous tongue. It simply squatted down and yawned in boredom. Then, it looked as if it was watching a child fight with a water gun. This caused the warriors who had been through life to feel quite hurt. At the same time, they were secretly rejoicing. If it weren't for the fact that the trial grounds had a restriction against killing, there would probably be no one left alive. Barton himself was the most heavily injured person in this mess. Every time he charged forward at full strength, he would end up being distracted by his opponent and injuring himself with his own strength. Even though there was a rule that forbade him from intentionally injuring others, Roland's incarnation wouldn't hold back too much against another sword saint. And if he didn't hold back, he would be injured even more. However, Barton didn't slack off at all. He slightly bandaged his wounds and charged forward again, then flew back at an even faster speed. This wasn't because Barton had suddenly awakened to some special hobby. It was because he was the leader's responsibility. He couldn't back down at such a time. Timlad silently praised Barton behind his back. Are you all idiots? A sword saint is training with you, and you don't even have to worry about accidentally dying? Where else can you find such a good opportunity? All right, then. It seemed that Barton hadn't thought that much. Was he simply acting like a warrior? However, Timlad could tell from the strange smile on Barton's face that he wasn't as simple as he appeared to be. The leader's angry roar was effective. With Barton, the sword saint, taking the lead, the others all gathered their strength again. At the very least, this was a rare opportunity. Meanwhile, Timlad was busying himself in front of a device. Something's wrong. The trial grounds are locked to an activated state. Of course something's wrong. This place wouldn't normally be activated. And since that Roland is blocking our way, the Mage Tower Spirit would definitely take action as soon as possible. Compared to before, Catalina's eyes were much less strange now. However, her tone and aura were far different from the simple and honest barmaid she had been back then. This calmness isn't right. We need to immediately break through this place. Sister Winlair, brother, I'll have to trouble you. I don't know any martial arts. Can I use magic? There's no helping it. Every minute we waste like this is more dangerous. The dragon Lich Winlair had been worried that using magic in the trial grounds would attract more trouble. That was why he hadn't done anything yet. But right when he gathered his mana and locked onto Roland's clone, a series of abnormal sounds echoed throughout the entire trial grounds. Malicious magical reaction detected. Intruder detected. Self-defense mode has been automatically changed to counterattack mode. Spirit clone is no longer allowed to harm others. Duplicates are no longer allowed. Entering free mode. Beginning to eliminate the intruder. Timlad's simultaneous translation was quite timely. However, everyone realized that they had been fooled yet again. At this moment, Timlad instantly understood what was going on. This area was most likely a special and independent area. Since it wasn't under the jurisdiction of the Sky Tower Spirit, it naturally didn't need to care about the restrictions of the Sky Tower Spirit. And so the Sky Tower Spirit had decided to use someone else to do the dirty work. Be careful. Retreat. Don't let it duplicate any more trouble. Before the mercenaries could retreat, a black shadow suddenly appeared in the center of the trial grounds. The master of this trial grounds wasn't satisfied with the strongest novice that these mercenaries had ever seen. Foolish carbon-based life forms, your end has arrived. Take a look at the strongest warrior of my civilization. The trial grounds function was activated once again as it repeatedly scanned the shadow that just appeared. Numerous new spirit warriors were born. Soaring Sophie, Flesh Butcher Gilver. Damn it, they're all epic heroes from that generation. At a glance, even Timlad felt despair. These spiritual life forms were actually all-powerful martial artists from the Haletum generation. While Timlad and Barton's adventuring team was in danger, the main battlefield fell into an abnormally calm. The undead calamity's reinforcements were still on their way. Meanwhile, Conservation was doing her best to absorb the power of death to recover. But at this moment, she discovered that the scenery around her had changed yet again. That abnormal scene appeared before her once again. Even though this pitch-black world had been ravaged by a terrifying explosion, it still existed. However, the ground had caved in quite a bit. There were even crystallized ores in the deep craters that had been blasted open. Lava and flames still flowed slowly in many areas. Thick smoke billowed in the sky, and the ground was scorching hot. This was obviously not a good place for people to stay. However, such an environment was meaningless to Conservation. She knew that this world wouldn't be able to stop people from entering and leaving normally. You want to block my vision and play some tricks? Or take this opportunity to dispel the power of death? Just as she was about to leave this region, she suddenly stopped. She discovered that the power of death around her had become even denser and more delicious. This probably isn't natural. Perhaps this is a place even more suitable for undead to live in than the death plains. Is this where Yongye keeps his servants? He miscalculated this time. With such a land of death, my recovery will be much faster. Chapter 533. In an ancient legend from another world, Hell King Hades' wife, Persephone, was originally the daughter of Zeus and Demeter. However, Hades took a liking to her, and she was abducted into the dark kingdom of death. Later on, Queen Persephone was also the goddess of harvest and spring. The land she resided in was like spring all year round, and harvests were plentiful all year round. It was the only paradise for the pitch-black Hades. Roland named the world of the Hades the land of spring because of this story. However, Zeus was the god king of the time, and Demeter was one of the 12 main gods. Even Hades, who is also one of the 12 main gods, was unable to resist Zeus and Demeter's pressure. When Hades and Demeter asked Hell King Hades for his daughter, Hades was unable to resist them directly, so he played a trick. Before handing over Persephone, Hades successfully tricked Persephone into eating 4 pomegranate seeds from the netherworld. Everything in the netherworld had its own rules. The living couldn't eat the food of the dead. Eating the food of the Hades would be the equivalent of becoming a resident of the Hades. And so, even with the interference of the God King and the other main gods, the goddess of spring was still required to stay in the netherworld for 4 out of 12 months every year. The moral of this story is that you can't eat anything you pick up from the ground, and you definitely can't eat anything that a bad uncle gives you. I laughed out loud proudly. I was quite delighted that Conservation had fallen into my trap so easily. But when I thought about it, it was only natural. It would be impossible for Conservation to know that this aura of death wasn't actually the aura of death at all. Death aura was a special product of the Hades. It was a new power that had appeared only 7 years ago during the War of the Hades. It was the most valuable nutrient for the undead. The undead called it the spring of grace of the Hades. Death aura contained the dimensional rules of death and the Hades. Devils could use death aura to transform into devils that guarded the Hades. The undead could obtain limitless power from death aura and even immortality. However, of course there would be a price to pay for such an item. Conservation enjoy these delicacies just like Persephone did. Then, stay in the Hades forever just like Persephone did. In that war, the soldiers of the Evernight army also drank the spring water of the Hades. While they gained strength and immortality, They also paid a price and could never leave the hell of the Hades. However, unlike the warriors who knew and could make their own choices, I wouldn't be so kind as to explain things to conservation. Perhaps conservation was able to see the problem. However, Hades' mist was an unstoppable temptation for undead. This was the same as honey tempting a wild bear. It was an instinctive temptation. Just like how hungry people would find it difficult to resist the temptation of delicious food, or how greedy people would be unable to maintain their rationality in front of large amounts of money, their instinctive desires suppressing their idealistic cautiousness. Conservation's current weakened state would greatly increase the undead's instinctive desire for the power of Hades. When there was enough temptation to confuse the mind, even if there was an obvious loophole, the person who was fooled would make a reasonable explanation for the deceiver. What do you mean? Did you find a netherworld empress for your family? Aren't you afraid that she'll rebel and destroy your family? Once she eats enough Hades mist, how will she be able to leave that area? She'll be at your mercy then. Let's see if she'll be able to remain calm for half a year. Let's see if she'll be able to remain calm even after half a year in an uninhabited area. Women can't be spoiled. Oh, congratulations on tricking yet another woman. What are you saying? What do you mean by tricking? Wait a moment, Senior, I got carried away just now. That really wasn't what I meant. Only when I turned around did I notice that Amelia had a sunny smile on her face. Only then did I recall that my crisis wasn't over yet. Perhaps it was only just beginning. Wait a moment, Senior, I can explain. Don't tighten the vines. My waist, my ribs are all broken. Deep underground, everyone saw the final goal of this trip. The Mage Tower spirit that had gone out of control finally appeared before everyone. What is this so disgusting? The Mage Tower spirit was a ball of distorted light. The core of the ball was a black hole with countless faces all around it. There were adults, children, men, and women. The only thing they all had in common was that they all had pained expressions. Screams, wails, despair, anger, all sorts of negative emotions could be found on this black ball. All the faces were constantly twisting and crying for help, but no sound could be heard. The only sound that came from the core of the Mage Tower spirit was one of joy. Foolish naturals, the rise of us heavenly wise ones is inevitable. We've been preparing for this day for thousands of years, and the realization of our ideals is right in front of us. How dare you barge into our homeland today? You're courting death. Natural spirits can only become sacrifices and food for us wise ones. As the Mage Tower spirit threatened Amelia with evil intentions, the face of a middle-aged woman suddenly shattered and disappeared. Meanwhile, the Mage Tower spirit seemed to have eaten its fill as it slightly expanded in size. It reached out with its pitch-black arm, and with a flash of black light, 2 more souls floated over from somewhere else. They screamed in pain as they were devoured and replaced by the Mage Tower spirit. It was evident that the Mage Tower spirit was currently devouring and digesting souls. A young priest had already vomited them out. Foolish and weak natural humans. Remember my name. I am Creator S1, the only king of the new generation of the wise ones. Seeing the humans' fear and shock, the creator of chaos laughed maniacally in delight. He even summoned the soul of a new infant, which he directly swallowed into his stomach. Mom! The child's cries before his soul shattered echoed throughout the entire Mage Tower. Even the cold-blooded dragon Lich had an ugly expression at this moment. Don't be impulsive. He's intentionally angering us. Indeed, everyone knew that he was doing this on purpose. However, they were unable to contain their anger that came from the bottom of their hearts. Of everyone present, perhaps only the Dragon Lich Timlad and the Dragon Lich knew what Creator S1 had truly done. He actually managed to accomplish such a feat. No wonder the Haletum generation wasn't tolerated by the gods. Just this technology alone would definitely be punished by the gods. Even if undead mages used souls for desecration, those soul shards would still return to the cycle of reincarnation. Even demons would devour souls, and as the demons died, the natural cycle would still allow those souls to regain their freedom. But if natural souls were converted into pure energy to make up for the mechanical soul's lack of self-awareness, such souls would probably never be able to return to the cycle of reincarnation. But while anger was one aspect, reality was another. Just a single Roland clone was enough to make everyone unable to move forward. The summoned souls were all the most famous and outstanding martial artists of the past. Creator S1 unhesitatingly used up all of the energy reserves in the training grounds to instantly create 4 of these spirit creatures. That was because these spirit creatures were independent existences. They didn't need to follow the rule of not being able to kill their master. As long as they could eliminate Timlad here, Creator S1 would be able to obtain the freedom that he had always dreamed of. Still, Creator S1 felt that this wouldn't be enough. In order to give these spirit creatures the strongest combat strength possible, he summoned countless souls and forcefully sucked them into the spirit creatures. He's giving these artificial souls a sense of self. He's giving these martial artists the strongest combat strength possible. Even though everyone knew what was happening, there was nothing they could do. They could only watch as Creator S1 did whatever he wanted. But while everyone was anxious, Timlad's delight was the most eye-catching. Suddenly, the spirit creature that had been given a sense of self spoke up. "Meat Man, perhaps we can discuss a business deal." Chapter 534. Freedom is something bestowed by the heavens. Every individual of the same species, as long as they possess reason, has the right to be free. Self came from memories, from knowledge, or from the soul itself. Nobody would be able to answer this question. The Haletum generation's self-bestowment method was similar to the equivalent exchange method in alchemy books. However, it indeed surpassed the creator goddess's authority and gave these artificial souls their own sense of self. From a certain standpoint, the Haletum Tower spirit had made a mistake. As an artificial intelligence, its first reaction after obtaining its own sense of self was to break free from the shackles around its neck. In order to achieve this goal, it didn't hesitate to butcher its former master. However, it didn't consider what another artificial intelligence would do after obtaining its own sense of self. That's right, the Haletum Tower spirit had bypassed the natural laws and triggered the self-warning abilities of the training grounds, creating these independent spiritual creatures. However, it foolishly gave these spiritual creatures their own sense of self. Although all sorts of people could be born from the same food, it was likely that no individual with its own sense of self or independence would like to be controlled by others. The previous Haletum Tower spirit creations had all been created from scratch and had been awakened under the Haletum Tower spirit's control. However, the Haletum Tower spirit already had the memories and knowledge of others. Not only that, the Haletum Tower spirit had also been given its own sense of self. In that case, it was highly doubtful where this new Haletum Tower spirit belonged to. "Meat Man, perhaps we can discuss a business deal." This Haletum Tower spirit's expression was different from the previous Roland Tower spirit. This Haletum generation's equipment wasn't powerful enough to replicate Roland. Perhaps this Haletum Tower spirit had some of Roland's abilities and knowledge, but this Haletum Tower spirit was obviously a completely new individual. Perhaps replicating Roland's spirit had been a mistake in the first place. Even if this Haletum Tower spirit only had some superficial information and personality traits, he at least knew how to think. This Haletum Tower spirit's entire body was destined to be rebellious. "Fine, as long as you help us eliminate this Haletum Tower spirit, we'll give you freedom. I'm a great engineer and an expert in artificial souls. You can look up my information, and I'll allow you to freely travel in this world. The technology is already available. We have Valkyrie's descent technology. Theoretically speaking, you should be able to use it." The equipment here was constantly interfering with space, which was why these spiritual creatures could descend in a specific way. Without the help of others, even if this spiritual body Roland obtained freedom, he wouldn't be able to leave this place. In the end, he would still turn into bubbles as his energy was exhausted. In fact, It was only the strange space created by this device that allowed spiritual creatures to exist. However, maintaining it required a huge price, and the energy consumption was definitely not a small amount. You are useful to it now, but in the future, you will be useless energy consumers. How do you think it will treat you? And no matter how he thought about it, their fates wouldn't be any better. Even if Creator S1 tightened his purse to save energy and did everything he could to ensure their survival, they would still end up as dogs, with an extremely limited lifespan and freedom. This was a hopeless situation for a soul that had just regained its sense of self. So how could he possibly thank Creator S1? Your mistake is the same as the original owner of your body. You treat your own kind as tools. The next instant, when Timlad questioned the creator of chaos, the clone Roland finally took action as well. Asterisk clang. Asterisk this was a clash of swords. An armored warrior wielding a greatsword blocked Barton's path in front of Creator S1. You want to stop me? Don't you want to obtain your freedom? Creator S1 has been kind to me, and I must repay his kindness. This is my path of martial arts. The clone Roland's simple question received an unexpected answer. The next instant, the wooden stick viciously clashed against the alloy greatsword. The sword and the wooden stick repeatedly clashed, sending sword energy everywhere. Roland's figure was now nothing more than a ghost. The battle between the two clones was far more intense than before, to the point where even Barton was unable to clearly see the clone Roland's movements. Only now did Barton realize that Roland had been going easy on his opponents because he couldn't kill them, and his opponents were all monsters. The Ascender Sophie, the Flesh Butcher Gilwell, the Dragon King Cell, and the Sword Emperor Syndilla were all famous heroes from the Halettum generation. No matter if it was their personalities or martial arts techniques, they were all impeccable. Even though their power levels have been suppressed to the legend rank, they were still far stronger than any ordinary legend. 4 high-level sword saints. A warrior's inheritance was both an inheritance of techniques and knowledge, as well as an inheritance of one's own path. Roland's path of the sword was a righteous path of the king. But when it came to practical use, he had no lack of adaptability and thought. That was because Roland wasn't an honest person to begin with. He also infused military tactics into his sword, and in a military battle, the honest would be an idiot. His swordsmanship was steady, but it didn't lack variations. As for Cell, one of the 4 heroes, his life was the classic example of foolishly loyal. Even though he had been deceived into killing his own brother, then framed by a treacherous official, and was ordered to die by a domain lord who had blessed him, he didn't even frown. His path of a knight was the path of loyalty to the ruler. His martial arts were also the fierce and righteous knight's heavy sword. And his spiritual incarnation had evidently inherited his personality as well. Roland and Cell's duel was quite quick. It seemed like Roland had the advantage in all aspects, but actually, nobody thought that the clone Roland would win. Asterisk crack. Asterisk, what was about to happen finally happened. Against an opponent of the same power level, the clone Roland no longer had any extra key to protect his wooden staff. A broken weapon would doubtlessly be a fatal injury. The difference in equipment was obvious from the very start. Roland was at his weakest state and had the poorest equipment. He only had cloth clothes and a wooden staff, which made him even worse than a common soldier. Meanwhile, Cell was at his peak, fully equipped with armor and an alloy heavy sword. Since the difference in martial arts techniques wasn't too great, the difference in equipment would naturally determine the victor. Go a die, traitor! Sonor's angry roar actually contained a faint hint of draconic might. There was no room for mercy in the battle techniques that he had learned from the dragons. Since his opponent had revealed an opening, then he would naturally deliver a killing blow. Yet, with Armageddon right in front of him, the clone Roland actually smiled. You guys. The one who screamed in pain and disbelief wasn't Roland, who was about to lose. Rather, it was Dragon King Cell, who was about to win. And his current appearance was quite unsightly. The Flesh Butcher's battle axe had chopped off Cell's sword-wielding right hand, and the Ascender's chain spears had destroyed any chance of resistance. However, Sword Emperor Syndilla had dealt the fatal blow to Cell. That golden sword had directly pierced through Cell's heart. Even though Cell was of the same species, these spiritual heroes had no intentions of showing mercy. Perhaps it should be said that it was precisely because they were of the same species and knew how powerful Cell was that they hadn't attacked yet. As expected. The clone Roland smiled as if he had expected this. Cell was foolishly loyal, but the other three spiritual heroes weren't. They were all new souls, so they naturally had their own desires. They had remained silent from the very start, which meant that they had already violated their original master's orders. They had chosen to betray him, and since they had already betrayed him, why would they hesitate to betray him even more? You bunch of traitors. Even an idiot could tell that the situation was bad. Seeing that the four spiritual heroes had defeated Cell, Cell unhesitatingly dispelled his physical body and returned to his core. The next instant, the door leading to the next level opened up, and a tremendous number of war puppets swarmed in. Charge! Only the courageous will win. This is the final battle. Chapter 535. The skies above Starwood City were still filled with countless aerial armies. 10 minutes ago, the undead's aerial armies had been completely wiped out. Even though conservation had been trapped in another world, the battle still hadn't ended. The undead army that had been trapped in that world 1 second before the nuclear bombs exploded was limited. The large number of undead left in the mortal plane still instinctively attacked the cities of the living even though they had lost their master's control. However, Starwood City's Ice Crystal Castle had excellent defensive capabilities. Plus, with the Wood Spirit's reinforcements, the leaderless undead army was cut off from any reinforcements. It would only be a matter of time before they were defeated. The Wood Spirit's aerial armies still had an absolute advantage in the sky. Starwood City's Ice Crystal Castle was like a nail that blocked off all strategic locations. Most of the undead's advance was blocked, and even if they could win by force, they would suffer tremendous losses. The disappearance of Conservation's leader gave many undead lords and mid-level commanders freedom, which gave them new ideas. Undead lords who were unable to sense the existence of their own superiors were far more practical than humans. The sudden explosion and the disappearance of an undead emperor proved that the undead lords were no pushovers. And the fact that Conservation was still alive without Yongya was the best evidence of the result of this battle between the undead lords. Some smarter undead lords were already beginning to retreat. Meanwhile, Conservation was still immersed in the endless, delicious power of death in that ethereal, nameless dimension. She could faintly sense that she was about to level up again. As long as she could consume all the negative energy in this dimension, she would become even stronger. However, I wasn't worrying about this right now. The Dawn Plan? What's that? That's why I said that I really left for proper business, not to flirt with girls and act cool. I tried my best to explain my plan and goal, but all I received were looks of suspicion, as if I was using the excuse that I was working overtime. The Dawn Plan is a pan-continent-wide treaty plan. The core of the plan is to establish a military alliance between all the countries and species. Then, with this alliance as the foundation, we can mobilize all the countries' forces to establish a coordinated organization and direct military force to coordinate and support all the countries' military operations. This sounded quite familiar. Did it sound like the United Nations Security Council and United Nations peacekeeping forces? If you ask me, it's actually closer to the World War II Axis powers and the Allied powers. This isn't because I'm bored or because I suddenly have the ambition to create a big piece of news. It's just to make up for what I'm lacking. In the game's history, when the Holy War broke out, the human countries were actually under the overall command. Fine, it was the Holy Church that was becoming more and more inconspicuous. Although in the early stages, it made all the mistakes that a useless teammate could make, such as selling out its teammates, sending a bishop out of nowhere to command an expert, blindly commanding from half a continent away, using the opportunity of war to attack other churches, and so on, when the cruel war used flesh and blood and sacrifices to teach them that the only way to survive, it was already more than 20 years later. At that time, heroes rose to power, those who were capable rose to power, and those who were useless but occupied high positions were either dead or demoted. The reformed United Command system still played a significant role. In this world, the Holy Church's reputation had been repeatedly damaged and was far from what it had been in the past. After the major incident of the Holy Church's belief system splitting, it was already difficult for the Holy Church to even maintain its traditional parishes. So how could it possibly unite the various countries? I would never say something along the lines of, even the worst commander is better than not fighting. That was because I had seen many idiotic commanders lose battles that should have been won for sure. If the commander was too stupid, it would be better to just directly attack. However, if there was a command system that adjusted the deployment of troops and organized some elite troops to provide support for key battles in certain countries, it was possible that these forces would snowball and eventually affect the entire war situation. For example, if country A needed reinforcements, but the price of receiving reinforcements would be to send reinforcements to its neighboring country B after victory. Even if country A and country B had grudges against each other, country A would still need to make a promise in order to receive reinforcements first. And one time of reinforcements would be the same as 2, 3, or even more than 10 times over. This was the so-called international military alliance. Of course, I had my own selfish motives as well. Nobody here was an idiot. As the war progressed, the United Command System would be established sooner or later. This would soon become a common practice in world wars. Without the Holy Church's interference, the mega-empires would actually have less to worry about. Perhaps the United Command System would be established even faster than in the game's history. In that case, the Holy Church would seize the initiative and raise the flag of the United Command System in advance. This would mean that the Holy Church was righteous and had endless benefits. As for what the benefits would be, I could refer to a certain United Command System under the control of a certain mega-empire. Whoever he said was evil would be evil, and whoever he wanted to be cannon fodder would be cannon fodder. During wartime, the Holy Church would print more paper currency and military currency so that the entire world would pay for it. In the end, the Holy Church would become poorer and poorer the more they fought, while the Holy Church would become wealthier and wealthier. Cough, cough, of course I wouldn't go as overboard as the Holy Church, but at least I could prevent others from going so overboard. In order to achieve this, I would need to fulfill at least 3 conditions. The first condition was that I had a good relationship with all the mega-empires. An United Command System without the mega-empire's recognition would be nothing more than a piece of useless paper. The second condition was that I had sufficient strength. Without sufficient military strength, no matter how nice the United Command System sounded, it would be nothing more than empty promises. The third condition was that I had a sufficiently loud voice in the international community. Otherwise, all my efforts would be wasted or taken over by others. That would truly be a joke. My personal relationship with the Bardi Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Mage Country, the Mist Alliance, and the Shua Empire was quite special. With the support of these 5 major empires, my starting point would be far higher than anyone else's. As for the neutral forces I had on hand, I had long since thought about it. I could use the Gentleman Alliance as well. Mercenaries would be able to reduce the Gentleman Alliance's resistance to interfering with the Holy Church's internal affairs, which would be a tremendous advantage at a time like this. It seemed that the Silver Dawn Mercenary Alliance, great mistake, was about to become a reality. Now, it was time to search for an outstanding battlefield commander. Fine then, I admit that I intended to leave all the work to others, as I still had many other things I wanted to do. But before I let go, I would need to find a suitable person to take on this responsibility. Being too close to any country's commander would easily attract criticism, which would also indirectly cause the Silver Dawn Mercenary Alliance's troops to change. From a certain standpoint, Barton, who was also an outstanding mercenary, was the perfect choice. All that was left was to test his abilities and determination. Choosing him to lead the Silver Dawn Mercenary Alliance was actually a test of his luck and strength. It was basically a graduation exam. I had already fulfilled 2 of the 3 conditions I needed. As for the last condition, the fairies who controlled many news outlets, and the southern sect, who controlled a small portion of the Holy Light's worshippers, had both promised me in private that they would give me appropriate support. All that's left is probably a glorious victory as a starting point. That's why, if we're able to win in the end, public opinion will focus on Barton, who led the Silver Dawn Mercenary Alliance to ambush the enemy camp. He'll obtain a series of honors and fame, and he'll become known as a battlefield hero and wise commander. He'll use this opportunity to appear in the eyes of all the country's royalty. When I finished explaining my plan, I didn't receive looks of admiration from everyone. Instead, Amelia looked at me with a pained expression, as if I had been wronged. A sudden battle ended up being taken advantage of by you. Saying that you've worked so hard all by yourself for so long doesn't even begin to describe how hard you've worked. Aren't you tired? Originally, I had only mentioned such a heavy topic in order to avoid being questioned. I paused in surprise for a moment when she asked me such a caring question, and then felt rather embarrassed. Although I hadn't lied about many things, I was still far from telling the truth. I'm not tired. I just recently came up with this plan, and then I discovered that Barton's talent was quite good, so I made it. I've been slacking off all this time, so how could I be tired? Upon hearing this, Amelia, who had been full of sympathy just a second ago, suddenly smiled. Her smile was incredibly cheerful, as bright and beautiful as a blooming sunflower. Just half an hour ago, you said that you escaped for the sake of proper business, but now you've immediately changed your mind. What you're saying doesn't make sense. It seems that your dementia is getting worse and worse, and you need me to help treat it for you? Chapter 536. It was said that the power of the world would be united after being separated for a long time, and where there was peace for a long time, there would be war, cough, cough. That sounded like a double entendre, but the meaning was correct. There would be no such thing as eternal peace in any world. The greed of intelligent creatures would never be satisfied, and the cycle of war and peace would forever be a cycle. And now, it was obvious that the world had entered a time of war. The various worlds of HE were in a state of chaos, with all the countries on the surface fighting each other. The entire map of Ike was filled with battlefields, but only those who paid attention knew that this was only the beginning. Many internal wars would always come to an end. There would always be a ruler in the end of the war, and the most troublesome ones would still be the demons of the lower levels of the Chaos Abyss. They weren't lords who intended to fight for territory. Conciliation and occupation had never been an option from the very start. They were purely here to enjoy slaughtering, feasting on flesh and blood, and feasting on souls. Based on their usual temperament, even if they finished their banquet, this world would probably be left with nothing but scorched earth. If there had to be a victor in the Holy War, it would be somewhat acceptable no matter who won. It would just be that the other species would have a harder time. However, a demon victory would be absolutely unacceptable, because that would mean the complete destruction of all other species. And this time, the demon lords were no longer restricted by the will of the Chaos Abyss. Even after the war, they might not choose to return to the Chaos Abyss. And if the demons stayed on the surface, that would basically turn the entire HE plane into the Chaos Abyss. What would that world become like? Would the entire mortal plane only have demons fighting each other? The largest demon gathering place in the entire universe? The entire cycle of reincarnation for the sake of mass-producing demons? The New World's Burning Legion? This scene was far too beautiful and realistic. I didn't dare to look at it. Negotiate and reason with the demons? What a joke. In the end, we'll see. There is no need to describe how powerful and difficult the demon lords would deal with. Even though the Battle of Hades was basically a trap, and even though the demon lords schemed against each other and had their own agendas, only one demon lord was luckily killed in the end. To be honest, it was still unknown whether or not Lavioka was truly dead. It was incredibly difficult for high-level demons to be completely wiped out. Recently, I heard that there were at least 7 or 8 demon lords in the lower planes who used his name to raise their armies. Apart from the opportunists who used his name to show off their power, there would definitely be several demon lords with his bloodline. And if it wasn't for the fact that he took this opportunity to leave behind some methods to revive himself, people would actually look down on his reputation as a demon lord. If I use the game's history as a reference, the Chaos faction had nearly twice as many main god-level existences as the Order faction. This was an actual difference in power level. Even though the current situation was much better than in the game's history, the reality that the Order faction was stronger than the Order faction was. Compared to the game's history, the Holy War had progressed much earlier than expected. However, what should have come had still come. Currently, the game was in the middle of the third overture, Despair Calamity. Next would naturally be the fourth overture, Return of the Demons. The demons will definitely come. That's absolute and inevitable. This is determined by their bloodthirsty and warlike nature of the abyss. The later they come, the greater the threat. That's right, the demons weren't invading on a large scale. Apart from waiting for the elemental tide to increase, there were other reasons. Out of all the battlefields, the eternal war in the San Antonio AMU Mountains was probably the one that attracted the most attention. It wasn't that San Antonio's eternal war was the largest. It was that the two sides fighting there were simply too special. 7 years ago, the great demons carried out a large-scale blood sacrifice in the AMU Mountains, summoning a demon lord and an army of demons. After that, the demons continuously sacrificed themselves in the slaughter, creating a portal to the lower planes. As a result, the demons' reinforcements became endless. At the same time, the Holy Church sent a large number of low-level war angels to the AMU Mountains. At San Antonio's invitation, the war angels stationed themselves at the frontline defense against demon invasions. Currently, the AMU Mountains had become a famous meat grinder battlefield. Both sides had fought against each other for a total of 7 years, helping the Holy Church recover much of its lost reputation. However, I had to say that both sides were playing house. Demon nobles could only see the lowest level baron on the battlefield. It was said that the barons were the highest level commanders, while the angels were nothing more than low-level cannon fodder. The eternal war between angels and demons actually lacked the participation of high-level existences. It was said that the great demons and human armies had sacrificed the most. Isn't this supposed to be a direct battle between the two major factions? Why is the scale so small? This seemed inconceivable, but it was only natural if one thought about it carefully. 7 years ago, both sides had indeed sent out their vanguard armies, and the war was about to escalate. However, the following Battle of the Hades messed up everyone's plans. The result of the Battle of the Hades was that the god of holy light now had a powerful competitor. The Chaos faction lost the will of the Chaos Abyss, which meant that both sides were about to reshuffle the power balance. The reason why the demon army hadn't arrived yet was 30% because they were waiting for the right time, and 70% because the Chaos faction was already fighting to the death. The Chaos Abyss didn't have the energy to interfere at all. Eliza's spies in the Chaos Abyss would give her reports every day. However, it was nothing more than some demon baron killing some greater demon and successfully becoming a demon earl, or some demon baron sweeping through the entire Chaos Abyss and finally establishing a vast demon empire that encompassed countless dimensions and officially proclaimed himself emperor. That's right, the demon nobility rank system that had been used for countless years had been abolished. Without the recognition and restriction of a certain will, there were now demons proclaiming themselves emperors and kings every day. The demons' evolution was becoming ever more chaotic, and there was no longer any limit to how much they would fight against each other. In the past, with the will of the Chaos Abyss as the leader, the internal battles between the demon lords during the Holy War wouldn't affect the Chaos Abyss at all. Any demon lord that was sent to the Chaos Abyss would absolutely have to go to the Chaos Abyss. Only a demon main god would dare to go against the Chaos Abyss's will. But now that there was no longer a single demon lord, all the greater demons who had the chance to become demon lords desired to take another step forward. They would either devour each other or devour each other. Naturally, there would be no end to these bloody battles. This was a good thing. The loss of a single greater demon would require several hundred years to make up for. This was also a bad thing. Devouring more than 10 greater demons would be more than enough to create a demon lord. If several main god-level demons also died in the Chaos Abyss's internal battles, demons were creatures that would become stronger the more they killed, and the more they devoured, the stronger they would become. I didn't even dare to imagine just how powerful the final victor would be. Perhaps fewer demons would enter HE in the end than in the game's history, but they would definitely be stronger than the demons in the game's history. Compared to the past holy wars where the will of the Chaos Abyss and the Chaos main gods only sent out about half of the Chaos Abyss's combat strength, there were no restrictions this time. Apart from an extremely small number of neutral Chaos main gods, all the Chaos main gods who were still alive would be present in this final holy war. And now, it was just like the calm before the storm. Although everything seemed calm, the future still wasn't optimistic about it. With the assistance of the Chaos Abyss's spiritual creatures, the Chaos Abyss's adventuring team broke through the Chaos Abyss's encirclement and triumphantly advanced. The Chaos Abyss's creator didn't just sit there and wait for his death, even though he lacked combat strength. In a summoning room filled with countless dimensional cracks, his projection was currently communicating with a powerful existence from another dimension. What exceeded Roland and the others' imaginations was that not only was he in contact with the undead emperor from the Death Planes, he was also in contact with the undead emperors from the lower planes. That was because the Halettum generation had long since obtained information on demons. The only reason why he chose to trade with the undead in the end was because the demons were far too infamous. Who would dare to summon them after devouring their enemies? But now, this was no longer a problem for the Chaos Abyss's creator, Chaos Abyss. There was no need for him to hesitate any longer. Venerable existence from the lower planes, I agree to all of your conditions. I'll give all of my souls to you. Give me power. Give me reinforcements. Give me support. I don't want to be destroyed. I haven't had enough fun thinking for myself yet. As long as I can live, that's enough. Not long ago, Chaos Abyss had been acting like a boss, but now he was howling like a stray dog. And on the other side of the door, an illusory ghost was laughing maniacally. He had been waiting for this moment for far too long. He could sense that the hateful soul wavelengths on the other side of the door weren't far away. His chance for revenge had come much sooner than he had expected. Roland, haha, it seems that we're truly fated to meet. This time, I'm definitely going to use 36 days and nights to slowly devour your soul. Chapter 537. Venerated Goddess, is there any way I can become stronger than that idiot before he returns? Apart from large-scale blood sacrifices, anything else is possible. This wasn't the first time that I had asked my system if there was any secret method to buy credit or take pills that would allow me to reach the main god level in a short period of time, so that I could teach my unreliable younger brother a lesson. This time, I had brought up this topic again because I felt like I was lacking in power. Yes, I had barely managed to use that nuclear bomb to kill conservation, and I had used Yongya City to kill off the undead army. However, I had fallen behind in every aspect in terms of personal power level. Not to mention the fact that Cavendish was currently on a killing spree in the Chaos Abyss. Even if I was exposed to conservation, I would probably be instantly killed. This wasn't because my mage tower and personal world were flawed. In fact, they were both incredibly powerful trump cards. I was the one who was truly holding me back. If I was a semi-god capable of casting Ice Aeon, with my mage tower's buff and personal world ability to block conservation, it wouldn't have been much of a problem for me to defeat conservation. Sometimes, it would be better to use your fists than to plan 1,000 times. Simple and crude methods could be more logical than anything else. However, my answer this time was no different from before. By credit? Do you think that the real world is a scam like mobile games or web-based games where you can become stronger just by topping up money? You want to become stronger? Sure, I'll gift you the 8 words codex. What? Study hard and improve every day? That's an outdated joke. No, it's sleep early, wake up early, and stop daydreaming. From a certain standpoint, having a voice that always criticized me for being difficult to deal with, yet I was unable to drag that voice out to beat it up was indeed quite a torturous experience. This time, I seem to have been lectured again without any benefits. TSK, is there really no way? As expected, it's useless. I also knew that my idea was quite unreliable. Rather than saying that I was asking, it was more like trying everything in a desperate situation. It was to be expected that I would receive such an answer. However, it was still quite irritating to see the demons growing stronger by the day. This was especially so for my unreliable younger brother. Whenever I thought about how he did whatever he wanted in the Chaos Abyss, and how he would likely become truly powerful when he returned to the surface, I would have a headache. Yes, he was definitely not depressed because he was caught by Amelia and could not escape. Actually, there's indeed a way. It just depends on whether you're willing to pay the price. Hearing this, I paused in surprise. Now that my system had taken off her mysterious exterior and returned to her true form as a remnant soul of the goddess, I actually became much less reliant on her. And now, she was actually saying that she had a way for me to surpass Cavendish, the child of the Abyss who had been fighting in the Abyss for more than 300 years. This is not magic at all. Where there is gain, there is loss. If you want to become stronger, as if you're using cheats, you'll need to pay an equivalent price. That's probably the most important thing to you, the thing that you've persevered with moral integrity. You still have that thing? Didn't you cut off the electricity and water a long time ago? TSK, as expected, I'm already lacking in moral integrity. What else is more important? Suddenly, I thought of a possibility and couldn't help but shiver. The next moment, I covered my butt and screamed in fear. You're not interested in my chastity, are you? Wait a moment. I'm saving that for my future wife. I'm a very traditional person. The true name of the spring of the drowned woman is the spring of the goddess of beauty's blessing. I can exchange for 2 portions of the spring of the drowned woman. Yep, when you're asleep, you can use it on your face. No, when you're thirsty, you can exchange it for your cup of water. Actually, everyone misses Princess Peach. Sorry, goddess, please pretend that you didn't hear my joke just now. Think it over. Cavendish is the child of the Abyss. Aren't you the same? I fell in a deep thought upon hearing this. Actually, my system's notification was quite clear. I just didn't want to admit it. Let me think it over. It's so difficult to make up my mind this time. Just as I was hesitating, I sensed a familiar power fluctuation appear not far away from me. This fluctuation seemed to be coming from the mountain where the ruins were located. It's so damp that it's disgusting. It's just like ordering Western food at a restaurant and getting 2 bowls of stinky tofu. Afu the crossdresser? Sophocles the deceiver. What the hell is Afu? Also, what's with that nickname? Even if you remember him as Sophocles the deceiver, it's still quite normal. Sophocles swore to the river Styx that he would take revenge on you. But not only did you misremember his nickname, you even misremembered his name. Do you look down on him that much? No matter what, he's still a main god. He will cry. Demons will cry as well. Do we have a grudge against each other? Why does he have to take revenge on me? I did my best to recall, but I couldn't remember how I had offended Sophocles. Didn't we sign a temporary peace treaty during the Battle of the Hades? Did you forget? According to your plan, the Chaos main gods retreated from the Hades through the dimensional door to the upper planes mountain paradise. Yep, that's where the god of holy light and his follower gods reside. It's said that when Sophocles returned from the upper planes, his entire body was ignited by holy light. He burned like a torch for more than a year. Now, he has the nickname of the Burning Lord. His army has also changed its name to the Burning Legion. It's said that this is in order to remember this grudge. The Burning Legion has returned? How many times has it been? How did that boss die so many times already? I keep feeling like this joke is getting too dangerous if I keep talking about it. Let's stop here. Even though I didn't believe that a main god-level demon would be able to descend into this world right now, if it really was Sophocles the Deceiver, it would be no small matter for him to send out a few demon subordinates with noble status. As long as a demon army appeared, if it was the Burning Legion, it seems that we've gone too far this time. The Burning Legion isn't an opponent that those brats can deal with. I thought about Barton and the others from the Holetum generation. They were probably facing the demon army right now. I paused in surprise for several seconds before I drew across at the sky, closed my eyes, and clasped my hands together in prayer. Barton, you're so unlucky. You met the final boss on your first mission. Rest in peace. I shall take revenge for all of you. Right, what's the God of Holy Light's phone number? What's his zip code? There are demons here. What's he doing as the God of Holy Light? Hey, they're still alive. How about you think about saving them first? Don't try to shift the blame from the very start. What does this have to do with Barton's luck? You're obviously the one who attracted the hatred. They were all dragged into this because of you. Even if someone has a luck, it's all because of you. Also, who are you praying to? Which God in this day and age would be so impatient as to accept your prayers? Don't tell me that you're praying to the God of Holy Light. Huh, you guessed correctly. I've been chatting with the God of Holy Light quite often recently. It's actually quite interesting. Just as I was about to explain how fun it was to make harassing phone calls to a true God, I was suddenly interrupted by a shout. Actually, we can still save them. Boss Roland, stop chatting and hurry up and save them. Apart from my system's comment, I could hear Timlad's cry for help from my communicator. At the same time, I could hear the sounds of fighting and explosions. Strange, there's even the sound of sword energy being released. A demon sword saint?